if I told you that everything Bob Lazar said was true? What if the most controversial UFO whistleblower in history wasn't lying, wasn't delusional, and wasn't seeking fame? What if buried beneath the Nevada desert sits a craft so advanced that the government would kill to keep it secret? Tonight, we're going deep into the classified world of S4, following a trail of evidence that leads to a discovery so terrifying it changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there. But first, I want to thank Danny, that one guy 412, for suggesting this story. If you have ideas for future episodes, drop them in the comments below. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the unknown, hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories. It helps more than you know. This is my story. This is what I found. And this is why I'll never sleep soundly again. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I found, and what found me in return. I'm just a guy with a microphone, a cheap audio setup, and an unhealthy obsession with the truth that powerful people don't want you to know. My podcast, Fringe Frequencies, barely scraped together a few thousand downloads per episode. I covered the usual suspects: Bigfoot sightings, ghost encounters, government conspiracies, the kind of stories that make people roll their eyes and change the subject at dinner parties. But everything changed 3 months ago when a package arrived at my P.O. box with no return address. Inside was a weathered VHS tape and a single sheet of paper with 2 words scrawled in shaky handwriting: "Play alone." The label on the tape read S4/Lazar in faded black marker. My hands actually trembled as I fed it into the old VCR I kept, specifically for moments like this. The screen flickered with static before resolving into grainy black and white security footage. The timestamp read March 15th, 1989, 2:47:33. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The footage showed a massive hangar, clearly underground based on the concrete walls and industrial lighting. In the centre of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, was something that defied every rational explanation I'd ever clung to. A disc-shaped craft, maybe 30 feet across, being carefully manoeuvred by what appeared to be a specialised lifting apparatus. The object was smooth, seamless, reflecting the harsh hangar lights in ways that seemed almost liquid. But it was the people that really got to me. Figures in white hazmat suits moved around the craft with the careful precision of bomb disposal experts. Even through the grainy footage, their body language screamed caution, fear, respect for something they didn't fully understand. The audio was mostly static, but I could make out fragments of radio chatter. Moving element 7 to storage bay 9. Propulsion system remains active. Maintain minimum safe distance. Element 7, storage bay 9. The words echoed in my head as I rewound and watched the footage again, and again. By the 4th viewing, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the bottom right corner of the screen, barely visible, was a small placard that read, S4 authorized personnel only. S4, Site 4, the legendary facility that Bob Lazar claimed to have worked at in the late 1980s, where he said the government was reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. The same facility that officials insisted never existed, that Lazar's critics said was a product of his imagination or delusion. Yet here it was, captured on security footage with a timestamp that perfectly aligned with Lazar's timeline. I must have watched that tape 100 times over the next week, freeze-framing every detail, analysing every pixel. The more I studied it, the more convinced I became that this was genuine. The lighting was consistent, the shadows fell naturally, and most importantly the technology visible in the background, the lifting equipment, the monitoring devices, even the hazmat suits, all matched exactly what would have been available in 1989. This wasn't some modern hoax created with digital effects. This was real. But the tape raised more questions than it answered. If this was element 7, what happened to elements 1 through 6? Lazar had claimed there were 9 craft total at S4. Where were the other 8? And why was this particular craft being moved with such extreme caution? I tried tracing the package, but the post office had no record of who sent it. The tape itself bore no manufacturer markings that I could identify. Whoever sent this had been very careful to remain anonymous. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I couldn't just sit on this footage and hope someone else would investigate. I had to find out the truth myself. 3 days later, I loaded my car with camping gear, recording equipment, and every piece of research I'd compiled about Bob Lazar and S4. I was heading to Nevada, to the desert where this all began. I was going to find out what really happened to the ninth craft. Looking back now, I realised that was the moment my old life ended. The moment I stopped being just another podcaster chasing internet legends and became something else entirely. A witness, a target, a man who knew too much. The drive to Nevada took 2 days. 2 days to think about what I was really doing, to second-guess myself, to wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But every time I considered turning back, I thought about that footage, about the careful way those technicians moved around something they clearly didn't understand but deeply feared. Element 7, the ninth craft. Whatever it was still out there somewhere, and I was going to find it. The Nevada desert in November is a special kind of desolate. The temperature drops 40 degrees between day and night, transforming the landscape from a furnace into a freezer. I pulled into Rachel, Nevada, population 98, as the sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed almost alien against the stark desert backdrop. Rachel exists for one reason. It's the closest town to Area 51. The Little Ale Inn, a combination restaurant, bar and UFO memorabilia shop, serves as the unofficial headquarters for anyone crazy enough to come looking for answers in this corner of nowhere. The walls are covered with blurry photographs, newspaper clippings, and testimonials from people claiming to have seen things the government insists don't exist. I ordered coffee and a burger from Janet, the 60-something waitress who seemed to know everyone's story before they finished telling it. When I mentioned I was researching Bob Lazar, her expression shifted from friendly curiosity to cautious interest. "You media?" she asked, refilling my coffee cup without being asked. "Podcaster, small time." I showed her my business card. Just trying to understand what really happened back in the late 80s. She studied the card for a moment, then glanced around the nearly empty restaurant. "Most people who come here asking about Lazar fall into 2 categories," she said quietly. "Believers who want to prove he was right, and debunkers who want to prove he was lying. Which are you?" "I'm the 3rd category," I said. "Someone who's seen something that suggests he might have been telling the truth." That got her attention. She sat down across from me, her weathered hands wrapped around her own coffee cup. What kind of something? I couldn't show her the tape. Too risky, too public, but I could describe it. Her eyes widened as I detailed the hangar footage, the timestamp, the S4 markings. "Jesus," she whispered. "Where did you get that?" "Anonymous source. That's why I'm here. I need to know what happened to the craft Lazar worked on, specifically the one that might not have made it out." Janet was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told her. Finally, she seemed to reach some internal decision. "There's someone you need to talk to. Old-timer named Frank Kowalski. He's been living out here since the 70s, worked construction on some of the classified facilities before he got too old and too mouthy for the government's taste. These days he runs a small auto repair shop about 10 miles south of town." She wrote down directions on the back of a napkin. "Tell him Janet sent you, and tell him it's about the one that didn't fly out. He'll know what you mean." The drive to Kowalski's shop took me deeper into the desert, following a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. Just when I was starting to wonder if I'd gotten lost, I saw a collection of rusted vehicles and a small building with a hand-painted sign reading Frank's Fix-It. Frank Kowalski looked exactly like Central Casting would order for grizzled desert hermit. Somewhere in his 70s, with leathery skin, wild grey hair, and the kind of intense stare that comes from spending too many years alone with your thoughts. He was elbow-deep in the engine of an old pickup truck when I pulled up. "You lost?" he called out without looking up. "Janet sent me. Said you might know about the one that didn't fly out." That made him stop working. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, and fixed me with a look that made me feel like he could see straight through to my soul. "Janet's got a big mouth," he said finally, "but she's got good instincts about people. You recording this conversation?" I showed him that my phone was off. My recorder was in the car. He nodded approvingly. "The thing about Bob Lazar," Frank said, settling onto an overturned crate, is that everyone focuses on whether he was lying about working at S4. They argue about his credentials, his background, whether he really has the degrees he claims, but they're missing the important question, which is, if he was lying, how did he know so much about the layout of facilities that officially don't exist? How did he describe security procedures that weren't declassified until years later? How did he know about the specific types of alloys they were experimenting with? Frank lit a cigarette and took a long drag. I helped build some of those underground facilities in the 80s. Not S4 directly, I never had that level of clearance, but some of the support infrastructure, access roads, ventilation systems, power distribution, the kind of unglamorous work that keeps the exciting stuff running. What did you see? More than I should have. One night in early '89, I was working late on a generator installation about 5 miles from what we all knew was S4, even if we weren't supposed to talk about it. Around 3 in the morning, I saw lights in the sky. Not aircraft lights, something else entirely. Objects that moved in ways that defied physics, making turns that should have torn any pilot apart from the G-forces. He paused, studying my reaction. But the interesting thing wasn't what I saw in the sky. It was what I saw on the ground the next morning. Convoy of trucks heading in the opposite direction from all the others. While most traffic was heading toward the test facilities, these trucks were heading away, toward Papoose Lake. What was in the trucks? Couldn't see the cargo directly, but the way they were loaded, the way the drivers were moving, something heavy, something important, and something they wanted to get as far away from S4 as possible. Frank finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into the desert. About a week later, word started filtering through the construction crews. There had been an incident during a test flight. One of the experimental aircraft had malfunctioned, nearly crashed. Instead of risking another failure, they decided to mothball it. Mothball it where? That's where it gets interesting. Most of the experimental craft were eventually moved to other facilities when the program ended. But according to my sources, one was never moved. They sealed it underground and left it there. My heart was pounding. Where underground? Frank stood up, walked over to a battered filing cabinet and pulled out a sheet of paper covered with hand-drawn maps and notations. This is everything I've pieced together over the years. Underground facility networks, access points, ventilation systems. If I had to guess where they'd hide something they didn't want found, it would be here. He pointed to a location near Papoose Lake, marked with a red X. Old access tunnel that was supposed to be filled in when they decommissioned part of S4. But the paperwork shows it was only sealed, not destroyed. He handed me the map. But I'm warning you, son. If what you told Janet is true, if there's really evidence that Lazar was right about everything, then you're walking into something that powerful people have spent 30 years trying to keep buried. They've killed for less. The weight of his words settled over me like a cold blanket. But I'd come too far to turn back now. One more thing, Frank said as I prepared to leave. If you find what I think you're going to find, don't try to take it public directly. They'll discredit you, destroy your life, make you disappear if necessary. Document everything, but be smart about how you release it. I thanked him and headed back toward Rachel as the desert night closed in around me. But I didn't go back to my motel room. Instead, I drove to the coordinates Frank had marked on the map, parking about a mile away and hiking in with a flashlight and my camera. The access tunnel was exactly where he said it would be. A concrete opening set into a hillside sealed with a metal door that bore faded warnings about authorized personnel only. But Frank was right about something else too. The door wasn't welded shut or filled with concrete. It was sealed with a heavy padlock that looked much newer than the rest of the installation. Someone had been here recently. Someone who wanted to be able to get back in. Standing in the desert darkness, staring at that sealed door, I realized I'd reached the point of no return. Everything up to this moment had been research, investigation, the kind of work any curious person might do. But breaking into a classified government facility was something else entirely. It was the line between being a podcaster with questions and becoming a criminal with answers. I thought about the footage on that anonymous tape, about the careful way those technicians had moved around something they clearly feared and didn't understand, about Frank's warning that people had been killed for less than what I was contemplating. Then I thought about the truth. about the possibility that 30 feet underground, sealed in a concrete tomb, sat proof that we are not alone in the universe, proof that the government had been lying to us for decades. I went back to my car and retrieved the bolt cutters I'd bought in Las Vegas. Some truths are worth the risk. The padlock was newer than it appeared in the darkness. As my bolt cutters bit through the hardened steel, I realised it couldn't have been there for more than a few years. Someone else had been maintaining access to this tunnel, someone who wanted to keep their options open. The metal door swung open with a groan that echoed into the blackness beyond. I stood at the threshold, flashlight in hand, breathing in air that tasted of concrete dust and something else, something metallic and sharp that made my sinuses burn. The tunnel stretched ahead of me, sloping downward at a gentle angle, lined with ribbed concrete and studded with emergency lighting fixtures that hadn't seen power in decades. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to walk away, to go back to my safe little world of internet research and second-hand stories. But the memory of that security footage kept pulling me forward. Element 7, Storage Bay 9, answers waiting in the darkness. I started down the tunnel, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The flashlight beam revealed details that matched exactly what Frank had described. Industrial construction from the late 1980s, built to last and built to hide. Every few yards I passed sealed doorways with warnings stenciled in faded yellow paint. Restricted access. Authorized personnel only. Radiation hazard. Radiation hazard. That stopped me cold. I'd brought a camera and recording equipment, but I hadn't thought to bring a Geiger counter. If whatever was down here was radioactive, I could be walking into a death trap without even knowing it. But I'd come too far to turn back now. I pressed on, documenting everything with my camera, taking careful note of the layout and the various warning signs. The tunnel branched several times, but I followed Frank's map, staying on the main passage that led deeper into the complex. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I reached a section where the tunnel opened into a wider area. My flashlight revealed a junction point with several passages branching off in different directions, but it was the walls that made me stop and stare. They were covered with maps, detailed schematics of the underground facility, marked with dates, personnel assignments, and project code names. Some of the maps were faded and yellowing, clearly original installations from the 1980s, but others were much newer, printouts from computer systems that couldn't have existed when this place was first built. Someone had been using this facility recently. Someone with access to current intelligence and modern mapping technology. I started photographing everything, but the camera flash seemed impossibly bright in the confined space, and I worried about who might see it. Instead, I switched to using the flashlight to illuminate sections while taking longer exposures. It was slower, but much more discreet. The maps told a story that was both fascinating and terrifying. The underground complex was massive, far larger than anything Bob Lazar had described in his interviews. It extended for miles in every direction, with multiple levels, research facilities, storage areas, and what appeared to be an underground runway system. Project code names jumped out at me from the various documents: Looking Glass, Galileo, Red Light, and others that had been redacted with black marker. But it was one particular section of the map that made my blood run cold. An area marked Storage Bay 9, with a notation that read, Element 7, Permanent Storage, Authorized Personnel Only. Element 7, the craft from the security footage. According to the map, Storage Bay 9 was accessible through a service tunnel that branched off from this main junction, but the notation also included a warning that chilled me to the bone. Containment protocols in effect, biological hazard. Biological hazard, not radiation. Whatever was in Storage Bay 9 was dangerous to living tissue in ways that went beyond simple radiation exposure. I checked Frank's map against what I was seeing on the wall schematics. The service tunnel to Storage Bay 9 was the third passage on the right, marked with additional warnings and what appeared to be a security checkpoint. But according to the newer notations, the security checkpoint had been decommissioned pending facility review. Someone had deliberately disabled the security measures protecting Storage Bay 9. The service tunnel was narrower than the main passage, and the air grew noticeably colder as I descended. My breath began to fog in the flashlight beam, and I realised that this section of the facility was still climate controlled. Somewhere, power was still flowing to maintain environmental conditions in Storage Bay 9. After another 5 minutes of careful navigation, I reached a blast door that looked like something from a nuclear submarine. It was massive, easily 8 inches of reinforced steel, with warning symbols that I recognised as international biohazard markers. But the door was standing open, held by what appeared to be an emergency override system. Beyond the blast door was an airlock chamber with decontamination showers and radiation monitoring equipment. All of it was inactive, but the LED displays were still glowing, indicating that power was flowing to the system. Someone had recently passed through this airlock and left it in standby mode. The inner door of the airlock was also open, revealing a chamber beyond that was illuminated by emergency lighting. The air that drifted through the airlock was warm and humid, carrying scents that I couldn't identify, something like ozone and copper, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me uncomfortably of decay. I stepped through the airlock and into Storage Bay 9. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, but it wasn't the size that took my breath away. It was what occupied the centre of the room. Even covered by a heavy tarp, the object was unmistakably the same craft I'd seen in the security footage, 30 feet across, disc-shaped, sitting on what appeared to be specialised support equipment that kept it several feet off the concrete floor. But where the footage had shown a smooth, pristine surface, the tarp revealed the outline of something damaged. One section of the craft appeared to be collapsed inward, as if it had suffered some kind of catastrophic structural failure. The walls of Storage Bay 9 were lined with equipment that looked like a combination of laboratory and machine shop. Computer terminals, analysis devices, tool racks, and storage lockers filled every available space. But it was the papers scattered across the work tables that really caught my attention. Blueprints, technical specifications, research notes in multiple handwritings, some dating back to the 1980s, and others that were clearly much more recent. I started photographing everything, my hands shaking with excitement and terror in equal measure. The blueprints showed cross-sections of the craft's interior, revealing a propulsion system that defied everything I thought I knew about physics. The technical notes described something called a gravity amplification matrix, and element manipulation chambers that could somehow bend space-time around the vehicle. But it was the research notes that really made my skin crawl. References to biological integration protocols and consciousness interface systems suggested that this wasn't just a machine. It was something that required living interaction to function properly, and the newest notes, written in a handwriting I didn't recognise, described reactivation attempts and containment failures that dated back only a few months. Someone had been trying to get this thing working again. Recently, I was so absorbed in photographing the documents that I almost missed the sound of footsteps in the outer tunnel. Heavy boots on concrete, moving with the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Someone was coming. I quickly gathered up my equipment and looked for places to hide in the chamber. The space under the craft support platform offered concealment, but it would also trap me if whoever was coming decided to examine the vehicle closely. Instead, I found a gap between 2 equipment racks that offered a view of the entrance while keeping me hidden in shadow. The footsteps stopped just outside the airlock chamber. I could hear voices now, 2 men speaking in low tones that carried clearly in the concrete space. "Told you the containment field was fluctuating again," the first voice said. "It's been getting worse since we started the reactivation procedures." "The field strength is within acceptable parameters," the second voice replied. "We're not going to abort the project because of minor power variations." Minor? The biological readings spiked to nearly twice normal levels last week. "Whatever this thing does to living tissue, it's getting stronger." The voices were getting closer. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows between the equipment racks, trying to control my breathing and hoping the emergency lighting wouldn't give away my position. "That's why we're here," the second voice said. "To recalibrate the containment systems before tomorrow's test." They entered Storage Bay 9, and I got my first look at them through the gap in the equipment. 2 men in their 40s, wearing civilian clothes but moving with military precision. One carried a tablet computer and what appeared to be sensor equipment. The other had a large toolbox and wore the kind of expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "I still think this is a mistake," the first man said as they approached the covered craft. "This technology was sealed for a reason. The original research team documented severe psychological effects on anyone who spent extended time near an active unit. The original research team didn't have 30 years of technological advancement to work with," the second man replied. "Our containment protocols are far more sophisticated than anything they had in the 1980s. They began setting up equipment around the craft, connecting sensors to various points on the support structure. The man with the tablet started taking readings, his frown deepening as the numbers appeared on the screen. "The ambient energy field is definitely increasing," he said. "It's almost like the craft is sensing our presence and responding to it." "That's exactly what it's doing," the second man replied. According to the original notes, these vehicles were designed to interface with their operators on a neurological level. The more people interact with it, the more active it becomes. They pulled back the tarp, and I saw the craft clearly for the first time. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The hull was a seamless metallic surface that seemed to shift colour as the light hit it from different angles, sometimes silver, sometimes bronze, sometimes a deep blue that hurt to look at directly. But the damaged section I'd noticed under the tarp was even worse than I'd imagined. A jagged hole about 6 feet across had been torn in the craft's side, revealing an interior that seemed to glow with its own faint light. "Jesus," the first man whispered, "look at the breach integrity, it's healing." He was right. The edges of the damaged section were slowly, visibly growing back together. As I watched, metallic tendrils reached across the gap, weaving themselves into new hull material that was indistinguishable from the original surface. "The self-repair systems are accelerating," the second man said, checking his tablet. "At this rate, the hull breach will be completely sealed within 72 hours. "And then what?" "We try to fly something that killed its last crew. We follow the protocol. Full activation sequence, unmanned test flight, then human crew if everything checks out." They worked in silence for several minutes, taking readings and adjusting settings on equipment I couldn't identify. But it was clear from their body language that something was making them increasingly uncomfortable. They kept glancing at the craft as if they expected it to suddenly move or make noise. Finally, the first man stood up and backed away from the vehicle. "That's it. I'm done. The neural activity readings are off the charts. This thing is trying to make contact." "It's just responding to our presence," the second man said, but he didn't sound convinced. The original research indicated that prolonged exposure could cause hallucinations and paranoid episodes. Then maybe we should listen to the original research and leave this thing buried where we found it. They began packing up their equipment, moving with the quick efficiency of people who wanted to be somewhere else as soon as possible. But just as they were preparing to leave, the second man stopped and looked around the chamber with a puzzled expression. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "It sounded like breathing. Heavy breathing, like someone was trying to stay quiet." My blood turned to ice. I'd been holding my breath for so long that when I finally had to inhale, it must have been audible in the concrete chamber. I pressed myself even deeper into the shadows, praying they couldn't see me. The second man pulled a flashlight from his toolbox and began sweeping it around the chamber, focusing on the areas behind the equipment racks. The beam passed within inches of my hiding spot, but the angle wasn't quite right for him to see me. "There's someone here," he said quietly. "Someone who shouldn't be." "Impossible. The access tunnel was sealed and the security sensors would have detected any intrusion." "Then explain the breathing sounds. And look at this." We walked over to the work tables where I'd been photographing documents. "These papers have been moved. Someone's been going through the research files." The first man pulled out what looked like a radio. "Control, this is Assessment Team 2. We have a possible security breach in Storage Bay 9. Request immediate backup and a full facility sweep." The radio crackled with static before a voice responded, "Copy, Assessment Team 2. Backup is en route. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. Maintain your position and do not approach any unauthorized personnel." 15 minutes. I had 15 minutes to get out of Storage Bay 9, through the airlock, up the service tunnel, through the main facility, and out to the surface before armed security teams sealed the entire complex. The two men positioned themselves near the entrance to the chamber, effectively blocking my direct route out. But I'd noticed something while they were working. A ventilation grate in the far wall that appeared to lead to a different section of the facility. If I could reach it without being seen, I might be able to find another way out. The problem was that crossing the chamber to reach the ventilation grate would require me to pass within 10 feet of the covered craft. And based on what the men had said about the vehicle responding to human presence, getting that close might trigger something that would give away my position. But I didn't have a choice. In 13 minutes, this place would be crawling with security personnel who would shoot first and ask questions later. I took a deep breath and started moving. Moving through Storage Bay 9 while staying hidden required every stealth skill I'd never learned. The two technicians were focused on the entrance, watching for security backup that would arrive in just over 10 minutes, but their positioning meant I had to cross the most exposed section of the chamber to reach the ventilation grate. I waited until they were both looking toward the airlock, then made my move, staying low and using the equipment racks for cover. But as I passed the closest point to the craft, something extraordinary happened. The hull began to glow. It started as a faint luminescence, barely visible in the emergency lighting, but it quickly intensified to a soft blue-white radiance that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. The effect was so mesmerizing that I almost forgot I was supposed to be hiding. "Control, this is Assessment Team 2, the radio crackled. The craft is showing activation responses. Repeat, we have spontaneous activation in Storage Bay 9. Copy Assessment Team 2, are you near the vehicle? Negative. We're maintaining safe distance at the chamber entrance. The activation appears to be triggered by an external presence. External presence. Me. Somehow, the craft was responding to my proximity in ways that sophisticated sensor equipment couldn't replicate. As I crouched behind an equipment rack, I could feel something that I can only describe as pressure building in my head. Not painful, but definitely present, like someone gently pressing their fingers against my temples. The ventilation grate was only 20 feet away, but those 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles. Every step I took seemed to intensify the craft's response, and the glow was now bright enough that it would certainly reveal my position if I moved into open space. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. The equipment racks I was hiding behind weren't just random laboratory furniture. They were covered with papers, blueprints, and technical specifications that told the story of 30 years of secret research. And some of those documents were dated less than 6 months ago. Someone had been actively working on this project recently, very recently. I started photographing everything I could reach without exposing myself to the technician's view. The documents revealed a timeline that was both fascinating and terrifying. The craft had been discovered in 1987, not built by human hands, but recovered from what the files described as a controlled crash landing in the Nevada desert. Initial attempts to understand the technology had resulted in several deaths among the research team, leading to the project being classified at the highest levels and eventually sealed. But the research hadn't stopped. It had just gone deeper underground, literally and figuratively. The more recent documents described breakthrough discoveries in what they called consciousness interface technology. According to the research notes, the craft wasn't just a vehicle. It was a living machine that required direct neural connection with its operator. The alien technology had been designed to merge with the pilot's nervous system, creating a hybrid entity that was part human, part machine. And they'd been testing it on human volunteers. The medical reports were horrifying. Subjects who underwent the interface procedure reported complete sensory integration with the craft, describing the ability to feel electromagnetic fields and see gravitational distortions. But the process was irreversible and ultimately fatal. The longest anyone had survived the full interface was 72 hours before their nervous system completely burned out from the neural overload. The most recent entries, dated just 3 weeks ago, described a new approach using remote interface technology that would allow operators to control the craft without direct neural connection. But the test results were mixed at best, and several entries mentioned psychological contamination among the research staff. "Control, this is Assessment Team 2. We have a problem. The craft's energy output is increasing exponentially. We need immediate evacuation authorization. Negative assessment Team 2. Maintain position until backup arrives. This may be our best opportunity to document the activation sequence. The glow from the craft was now bright enough to illuminate the entire chamber. But it wasn't just light. It was something more complex. Something that seemed to carry information. Patterns swirled within the radiance. Geometric forms that appeared and disappeared faster than conscious thought could follow. And with each pulse of light, the pressure in my head increased. I was running out of time. The backup team would arrive in less than 5 minutes, and the craft's activation was creating enough light to make hiding impossible. I had to reach that ventilation grate now, or I'd be trapped when the security sweep began. But as I prepared to make my final dash across the exposed space, something incredible happened. The patterns in the light began to make sense. Not in any logical way. I wasn't suddenly able to read alien mathematics or understand exotic physics. But on some deeper level, the information being transmitted by the craft started to feel familiar. Like remembering a song you'd forgotten you knew, or recognizing a face from a childhood dream. The craft was trying to communicate with me. The realization hit me with such force that I actually staggered, barely catching myself before falling into the open space where the technicians would see me. But the moment of mental connection had given me something else. A sudden, inexplicable understanding of the facility's layout that went far beyond anything I'd seen on the wall maps. I knew there was another way out. The ventilation system didn't just connect to other parts of the facility, it tied into a network of maintenance tunnels that extended all the way to the surface. But more importantly, I somehow knew that the tunnels were unmonitored, designed as emergency escape routes for personnel working on classified projects. How I knew this, I couldn't say. The information had simply appeared in my mind, complete and certain, like accessing a memory that wasn't my own. Assessment Team 2, be advised that backup has arrived at the facility entrance. ETA to your position is 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I looked at the ventilation grate, then back at the glowing craft. The neural pressure in my head was becoming overwhelming, but I couldn't leave without physical proof. I spotted a fragment of the craft's hull material that had broken off during the original damage, a piece about the size of a smartphone sitting on a nearby workbench. It looked impossibly dense, almost black in the craft's blue glow, but somehow I knew it was what I needed. Moving quickly, I grabbed the fragment and made my dash for the ventilation grate. The metal felt unnaturally heavy for its size, and touching it sent electric jolts up my arm. But I managed to reach the grate just as footsteps echoed from the main tunnel. The grate was secured with standard screws, and I used my multi-tool to remove them as quickly as possible. Behind me, the craft's glow was intensifying, and I could hear the technicians talking nervously into their radios. "Control, the energy output is off the charts. We need immediate evacuation." I squeezed through the ventilation opening just as armed figures appeared in the airlock. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dark, but somehow I knew exactly which direction to go. The alien fragment in my pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, guiding me through passages that led steadily upward. 20 minutes later, I emerged from a hidden exit nearly a mile from the main facility, gasping desert air and watching black SUVs race toward the underground complex. I made it back to my car and drove straight through to Las Vegas, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The alien fragment sat in my jacket pocket, radiating an unnatural warmth that I could feel against my ribs. Every few miles I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see government vehicles in pursuit, but the highway remained empty. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of Vegas that I noticed the car following me. A silver sedan staying exactly 3 cars back, matching my speed changes with mechanical precision. When I took the next exit, it followed. When I pulled into a gas station, it parked across the street at a fast food restaurant. I was filling my tank when a man in his 50s approached me. Average height, greying hair, wearing civilian clothes that somehow screamed government employee. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent years in classified environments. "You look like someone who's had an interesting evening," he said quietly. Every instinct told me to run, but something in his demeanour suggested that running would be pointless. Instead, I finished filling the tank and turned to face him directly. "Depends on your definition of interesting," he smiled. Not a friendly expression, but not threatening either. "My name is Robert Kellerman. I worked at S4 from 1987 to 1991. I was one of the original technicians assigned to Element 7. Element 7. He knew about the craft. "I know who you are," he continued. "More importantly, I know what you found tonight, and I know you took something that doesn't belong to you." My hand instinctively moved toward the fragment in my pocket. The metal felt almost hot now, as if responding to Kellerman's presence. "That piece of hull material you're carrying," he said, "it's not just metal. It's part of a living system that's been dormant for 30 years. By taking it from the containment field, you've reactivated protocols that were supposed to stay buried forever." "What kind of protocols?" Kellerman glanced around the gas station, then gestured toward a coffee shop next door. "The kind we can't discuss in public. Buy me a coffee, and I'll tell you why Bob Lazar was both completely right and completely wrong about what we found at S4. 10 minutes later, we sat in a corner booth while Kellerman told me a story that redefined everything I thought I knew about the government's UFO programs. There were 9 craft originally, he said, but they weren't recovered from crash sites like everyone assumes. They were gifts. Gifts from who? From them. The original pilots. First contact didn't happen in the 1940s with Roswell. It happened in 1983 in the Nevada desert, when they landed voluntarily and offered to share their technology. Kellerman stirred his coffee, his eyes distant with memory. The problem was that their technology wasn't just advanced machinery. It was biological, living metal that interfaced directly with the pilot's nervous system. They tried to teach us how to use it safely, but we were too primitive, too impatient. What happened? The first 8 craft were successfully adapted for human use, more or less. We learned to create containment fields that limited the biological integration, allowing our pilots to control the vehicles without permanent neural fusion. But Element 7 was different. It was their command ship, the one with the strongest biological components. He paused, studying my reaction. When we tried to test it, the craft bonded with the pilot so completely that separating them would have meant killing both. The pilot lasted 3 days before the neural integration burned out his brain. We sealed the craft immediately, hoping to contain whatever biological contamination might spread to other personnel. But it didn't stay contained. No, the craft went dormant, but it didn't die. For 30 years, it's been slowly healing, slowly rebuilding its biological systems. And now, thanks to your little visit tonight, it's starting to wake up. Kellerman pulled out a tablet and showed me real-time sensor data from the S4 facility. Energy readings that were climbing steadily, biological activity indicators that were off the charts, and most disturbing of all, electromagnetic emissions that were reaching into space. "It's calling them," he said quietly. "The original pilots, or others like them. The fragment you're carrying is acting like a beacon, telling them that their command ship is active again." The implications hit me like a physical blow. By stealing a piece of alien technology, I hadn't just committed theft. I'd potentially triggered a new round of extraterrestrial contact. How long before they respond? Based on the emission patterns, probably 72 hours, maybe less if they have ships in the outer solar system. "What do you want from me?" Kellerman leaned forward, his expression intense. "I want you to give me that fragment, and I want you to forget everything you saw tonight. In exchange, I'll make sure you live long enough to go back to your normal life. And if I refuse, then in 3 days, when the sky lights up with ships that officially don't exist, you'll be the person they blame for ending the world as we know it." I looked at the tablet screen, watching the energy readings climb. The fragment in my pocket felt like it was burning now, and I could swear I was hearing something. Not voices exactly, but something like music playing at the very edge of audible range. "There's a third option," I said finally, "which is, I keep the fragment, but we work together. You help me document what's really happening, and when they come, we make sure the world knows the truth." Kellerman was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a radio and a Geiger counter. "This is a biosignature detector," he said. "It monitors the biological activity of alien technology. If you're going to keep that fragment, you need to understand what you're dealing with." He turned on the device and pointed it toward my pocket. The readings were immediately off the scale, with biological activity indicators that were higher than anything shown in the S4 data. "The fragment isn't just active," he said. "It's evolving, learning, adapting to human biology in ways that the original craft never could. Whatever happens next, you're not just a witness anymore. You're part of it." We drove back toward the facility in Kellerman's car, leaving mine at the gas station. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. Use his clearance to get us back into S4 officially, document the craft's activation sequence, and prepare for whatever response my theft of the fragment might trigger. "The facility will be on high alert after tonight's security breach," Kellerman warned as we approached the checkpoint. "But the advantage of working in classified programs for 30 years is that you accumulate enough dirt on enough people to guarantee cooperation when you need it." He was right. The guards at the checkpoint clearly recognized him, and while they logged our entry with obvious reluctance, no one tried to stop us. Within 20 minutes, we were back in the underground complex, following corridors that I now recognized from my panicked escape just hours earlier. But Storage Bay 9 was completely transformed. The craft was no longer covered by a tarp, and its hull was blazing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to flow like liquid light across the metallic surface. The damaged section I'd seen earlier was nearly healed, with new hull material growing visibly as we watched. But it was the sound that really got to me. A low harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate in my bones. "It's singing," I whispered. "Not singing," Kellerman corrected, "communicating. Probably with the fragment you're carrying." The chamber was crowded with technicians and monitoring equipment, all focused on the craft's unprecedented activity levels. But as soon as we entered, something changed. The harmonic frequency shifted to a higher pitch, and the bioluminescent patterns began pulsing in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. "Jesus Christ," one of the technicians called out. "The biological integration readings just spiked. There's someone here with active alien technology." All eyes turned toward us, and I realized that hiding the fragment was no longer an option. I pulled it from my pocket, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. The craft's song became a roar. The bioluminescent patterns exploded into brilliant cascades of colour that bathed the entire chamber in shifting light. And the air itself seemed to thicken, carrying scents and sounds that had no earthly origin. "Get everyone out!" Kellerman shouted over the noise. "Full evacuation now!" But it was too late. The craft was fully active now, and the hull breach that had been slowly healing suddenly sealed itself with a flash of light that temporarily blinded everyone in the chamber. When my vision cleared, the craft was rising from its support platform, hovering 3 feet above the concrete floor without any visible means of propulsion. The fragment in my hand was now glowing with the same bioluminescent patterns as the craft, and I could feel something that I can only describe as presence reaching into my mind. Not thoughts exactly, but concepts, images, emotions that definitely weren't my own. "Welcome back." The words appeared in my consciousness without passing through my ears. Not English, not any human language, but somehow perfectly comprehensible. The ship has been waiting. The ship has been healing. The ship has been calling. "It's trying to communicate," I called out to Kellerman, who was frantically working at a control panel. "Don't listen to it," he shouted back. "The psychological contamination starts with communication. Once it's in your head, it doesn't leave." But the presence was already in my head, and fighting it felt like trying to hold back an ocean with my bare hands. Images flooded my consciousness. Star systems I'd never seen. Technologies that defied physics. And most disturbing of all, memories of the craft's original pilot. I saw him die. Felt him die. Experienced the moment when the biological integration reached critical levels and his human nervous system simply burned out from the overload. But I also felt his joy in those final moments, the incredible sensation of becoming one with a machine that could bend space and time, that could travel between stars as easily as crossing a room. The new pilot understands. The new pilot carries the seed. The fragment in my hand was now too hot to hold, but I couldn't let go. It was fusing with my palm, sending tendrils of alien metal into my skin and bloodstream. But instead of pain, I felt expansion, my senses extending beyond the boundaries of my physical body to encompass the entire facility. I could feel the electromagnetic fields of every piece of equipment in Storage Bay 9. I could sense the bioelectric signatures of every person in the complex. And beyond that, I could feel something else, multiple somethings, moving toward Earth from the outer solar system at impossible speeds. "They're coming," I said, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. 3 ships, maybe 4. They'll be here in 18 hours. "How do you know that?" Kellerman demanded. I looked at him, and I realized that I could see more than just his physical form. I could see the electromagnetic pattern of his nervous system, the quantum fluctuations in his brain that corresponded to thoughts and memories. He was terrified, but he was also fascinated by what was happening to me. Because I'm connected to their navigation network, the fragment isn't just a piece of hull material, it's a communication device. It's been broadcasting our location since the moment I took it from the chamber. The craft moved closer to me, its hull now close enough to touch. The bioluminescent patterns were hypnotic, drawing me forward despite every rational instinct screaming at me to run. "Don't touch it," Kellerman warned. "If you make direct contact with the hull, the integration process will accelerate beyond any hope of reversal." But I was already reaching out, my hand moving without conscious direction. The moment my palm touched the craft's surface, the world exploded into sensation. The integration happened faster than Kellerman had predicted. One moment I was a human being standing next to an alien spacecraft, and the next I was something else entirely. Part human, part machine, part something that transcended both categories. I could feel the craft's propulsion systems coming online, responding to my neural commands before I was consciously aware of giving them. The chamber around us began to fade as my perception shifted to electromagnetic spectrums that human eyes had never evolved to process. But most shocking of all, I could sense the approaching ships with crystal clarity. 4 vessels, definitely coming from the outer solar system, moving at velocities that would have them in Earth orbit within 12 hours. But these weren't rescue ships coming to retrieve their lost technology. They were enforcement vessels coming to contain a contamination that should never have been allowed to spread. The child species has broken containment, the alien presence in my mind observed with something like sadness. The hybrid cannot be allowed to survive. "What are you talking about?" I tried to say, but the words came out as harmonic frequencies that resonated through the craft's hull. "Biological integration was forbidden for your species. Too primitive, too unstable. The command ship was damaged to prevent this exact outcome. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The craft hadn't malfunctioned during testing. It had been sabotaged by its own creators to prevent humans from achieving full integration with their technology. And now, by accidentally triggering the very process they'd tried to prevent, I'd created a situation that threatened both species. "We have to get out of here," Kellerman shouted, though his voice sounded distant and muffled through my transformed senses. "The facility will be locked down in minutes, and if they can't contain this situation, they'll sterilize the entire complex." Sterilize. Nuclear sterilization. I could sense the weapon systems being activated throughout the facility, fail-safes designed to prevent alien technology from falling into unauthorized hands, but I could also sense something else. Escape routes that the craft's navigation systems had mapped during its decades of dormancy. The hybrid can escape, the alien presence confirmed, but escape leads only to detection. The enforcement fleet will follow the bioelectric signature anywhere on this planet. "Then we go off planet," I said, the words forming as pure intention rather than sound. "Impossible. The hybrid lacks the neural development for interstellar navigation. Attempting such a journey would result in immediate death." But even as the alien consciousness tried to discourage me, I could feel the craft's systems responding to my commands. The gravitational manipulation systems that provided propulsion were incredibly complex, but they felt as natural to control as moving my own limbs. More natural, actually, like I'd been meant to operate this technology all along. The blast doors that had been sealing Storage Bay 9 began to buckle and warp as the craft's gravity field destabilized the surrounding space. Kellerman and the remaining technicians scrambled for the exits as pieces of the ceiling began falling around us. "The facility is collapsing," Kellerman called out through the chaos. "Whatever you're doing, you need to stop." But I couldn't stop. The integration process was accelerating beyond my ability to control, and the craft was responding to biological imperatives that overrode conscious thought. We rose through the collapsing chamber, through levels of concrete and steel that parted like water before the craft's exotic matter field. In less than 30 seconds, we burst through the desert surface into the star-filled Nevada sky. The freedom was intoxicating. After decades of confinement in underground storage, the craft, and by extension I, rejoiced in open space and unlimited movement. We climbed rapidly, leaving the lights of Las Vegas far below, racing toward the stratosphere where human aircraft couldn't follow. But the celebration was short-lived. My enhanced senses detected military jets scrambling from Nellis Air Force Base, armed with weapons I somehow knew could damage the craft's hull. More concerning, I could feel the approaching alien fleet adjusting course to intercept us. "The hybrid has 12 minutes before engagement with enforcement vessels," the alien presence informed me. "Recommend immediate surrender to prevent escalation." "Surrender to who? Your people or mine?" "Both species will demand termination of the hybrid. The contamination cannot be allowed to spread." I realized that I was caught between two forces that both wanted me dead. The human military saw me as a stolen alien weapon that had to be stopped at any cost. The alien enforcement fleet saw me as a biological contamination that threatened their carefully maintained isolation. But I had advantages that neither side expected. The craft's propulsion systems could outrun anything in Earth's atmosphere, and the neural integration gave me access to technologies that even the original alien pilots had never fully explored. The hybrid should not attempt experimental navigation, the alien consciousness warned, as I pushed the craft's systems beyond their normal parameters. Untested combinations of human creativity and alien technology have unpredictable consequences. Unpredictable is exactly what we need right now. I dove back toward the surface, using the craft's gravity manipulation to create a wake of distorted space-time that would confuse both human radar and alien sensors. The pursuing jets fell behind immediately, unable to match our acceleration or maneuverability. But the alien fleet was adapting, adjusting their approach to account for my erratic flight patterns. That's when I felt something that changed everything. A transmission from Earth, broadcast on frequencies that only the integrated craft could detect. Someone else was out there. Someone with access to alien communication technology. The signal was coming from a location in the desert about 50 miles from our current position. Someone who knew about the craft, who understood the integration process, and who was offering help. "Do not trust the transmission," the alien presence warned. Humans frequently use deception in tactical situations. But I was out of options. The enforcement fleet would be in engagement range within 8 minutes, and while the craft's defensive systems were formidable, they weren't designed to fight 4 ships simultaneously. I changed course toward the transmission source, diving toward the desert at speeds that would have liquefied any human pilot. But through the integration, the G-forces felt like gentle pressure, and the craft's inertial compensation systems protected my hybrid physiology from the worst effects. The transmission source was a small facility built into a mesa, camouflaged to look like a natural rock formation. But my enhanced senses could detect the electromagnetic signatures of advanced technology hidden beneath the desert camouflage. As we landed, I could feel the enforcement fleet entering Earth's atmosphere. In 5 minutes, this location would be discovered and destroyed. Whatever help this place offered, it had to happen fast. The facility hidden in the mesa turned out to be far more than a simple research station. As I emerged from the craft, still partially integrated with its systems, I was met by a woman in her 60s who showed no surprise at seeing a human-alien hybrid step out of a spacecraft that officially didn't exist. "You must be our missing pilot," she said calmly. "I'm Director Patricia Wells. We've been tracking your integration progress since you left S4. "Who's we?" I asked, though speaking with my physical voice felt awkward after hours of harmonic communication through the craft. "A joint task force that's been preparing for this exact scenario since 1991. When the original integration experiment failed, We didn't abandon the program. We moved it to a more secure location and continued research with volunteers who understood the risks. She led me into the facility, which was far larger than its external appearance suggested. The corridors were filled with technology that was clearly a hybrid of human engineering and alien design, the same kind of biological-mechanical integration that I was experiencing on a personal level. "We have 4 minutes before the enforcement fleet reaches this location," Wells said as we moved through the facility. "I need to know if you're willing to take a risk that could save both species from a war nobody wants." What kind of risk? She stopped at a large chamber filled with equipment that I recognized as communication technology, but far more advanced than anything I'd seen at S4. "We've been developing a communication protocol that would allow direct negotiation with the enforcement fleet, but it requires a fully integrated pilot to operate the transmission systems." The alien presence in my mind stirred uneasily. The director speaks of technologies that were forbidden to both species. Communication across the integration barrier was deemed impossible. "Impossible, but not theoretical," Wells continued, apparently able to sense my internal dialogue with the alien consciousness. "We've had 30 years to work on this problem, and we've made breakthrough discoveries that neither your ship's original designers nor our own governments are aware of." She activated the communication array, and immediately I could feel the electromagnetic patterns reaching out toward the approaching fleet. But this wasn't the simple beacon that my stolen fragment had been broadcasting. This was a complex signal that carried information about human civilization, our technological level, our peaceful intentions, and most importantly our readiness to return the integrated pilot without resistance. The transmission contains deceptions. The alien presence warned. Humans are not prepared for peaceful coexistence. The hybrid proves this conclusively. But as the signal reached the enforcement fleet, something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing their attack approach, the alien ships began to slow, entering a holding pattern in high orbit, while they analysed the information we transmitted. "They're listening," Wells said with obvious relief. "The communication protocol is working." "The enforcers request direct communication with the hybrid," the alien presence informed me. "They wish to understand how integration was achieved without the safeguards that were installed to prevent this outcome." The next few minutes involved a communication exchange that took place on levels I didn't know existed. Through the facility's enhanced transmission systems, I was able to interface directly with the enforcement fleet's command consciousness, a collective intelligence that spoke for their entire species. What I learned changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The original aliens hadn't been visitors or invaders. They were refugees. Their homeworld had been destroyed by the same kind of uncontrolled biological integration that was now happening to me. They'd spent centuries developing safeguards to prevent their technology from creating new hybrid intelligences that could threaten other species. But humans had done something that their scientists had thought impossible. We'd achieved integration while retaining individual consciousness. Instead of being absorbed into a collective mind, I remained fundamentally human while gaining access to capabilities that should have been beyond our species' comprehension. The hybrid represents a new evolutionary path, the collective consciousness admitted, one that our models did not predict. This changes the parameters of engagement significantly. "What does that mean?" I asked through the communication link. "It means that instead of containing a contamination, we may be witnessing the birth of a new form of intelligence, one that combines the creativity of individual consciousness with the capabilities of integrated technology." The communication continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The alien collective described their civilization's history, their reasons for limiting contact with developing species, and their growing realization that humanity might represent something genuinely new in the galaxy. But they also explained the dangers. Uncontrolled integration had destroyed worlds, created hybrid intelligences that consumed entire solar systems, while trying to expand their capabilities. Even if I represented a new evolutionary step, the risks were enormous. The hybrid must choose. The collective finally transmitted. Integration can be reversed, returning the human to baseline consciousness while preserving the lessons learned. Or integration can be completed, accepting the risks and responsibilities of becoming something beyond current human limitations. What are the responsibilities, I asked? To serve as an interface between species, to help humanity develop integration safeguards before the technology spreads, to accept isolation from both human and alien societies until the risks are better understood. The choice was impossible. Return to normal humanity and lose the incredible capabilities I'd gained, or accept permanent exile as something that neither species would fully trust. But as I considered the options, I realised there was a third possibility that neither the aliens nor the humans had considered. I made my choice 6 months ago, and I'm still not sure if it was the right one. I chose integration, but on terms that neither species had anticipated. Instead of accepting isolation, I became something else entirely, a bridge between worlds, operating in the spaces between human and alien civilization. The enforcement fleet returned to the outer system, but they left monitoring stations that track my movements and capabilities. The human governments declared the entire incident classified at levels that don't officially exist, but they also established a liaison program that allows limited communication when global security is at stake. And I've spent the last 6 months learning to use capabilities that I'm only beginning to understand. The craft and I are no longer separate entities. We exist as a hybrid consciousness that can operate in multiple realities simultaneously. I can interface with human technology and alien systems with equal ease. I can travel between star systems in minutes, or spend weeks analysing the quantum fluctuations that underlie physical reality. But most importantly, I've discovered that I'm not alone. The integration process isn't unique to the craft I stole from S4. It's happening spontaneously around the world, as human consciousness begins to interface with technologies we're not supposed to understand yet. The smartphones in our pockets, the satellites in orbit, the internet that connects our minds across continents. All of it is slowly, subtly preparing humanity for a level of technological integration that will make my transformation look primitive. The alien refugees didn't just bring advanced machinery to Earth. They brought evolution itself, in forms so subtle that we're experiencing it without realizing what's happening. Within a generation, maybe 2, every human on Earth will face the same choice I faced in that underground chamber. Integration or isolation, evolution or extinction, the birth of something new, or the preservation of something that may no longer be viable in a universe where consciousness and technology are merging at the quantum level. Bob Lazar was right about the technology, but he never understood what it really was. Not just advanced propulsion systems or exotic materials, but the next step in the evolution of intelligence itself. 3 weeks ago, I detected the first spontaneous integration event in Tokyo. A programmer who'd spent so much time interfacing with quantum computers that the boundary between his consciousness and the machine began to blur. Last week there was another case in Geneva, involving a physicist working on consciousness research who achieved temporary integration with an AI system. It's starting. The process that began with 9 alien craft hidden in the Nevada desert is spreading through human civilization like a benign virus, preparing us for a transformation we don't yet understand. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other intelligences are watching our progress with interests we can't yet comprehend. I'm still posting episodes of Fringe Frequencies, but now they serve a different purpose. Instead of investigating mysteries, I'm preparing humanity for truths that most people aren't ready to accept. Each episode plants seeds, raises questions, gets people thinking about possibilities that mainstream science insists are impossible. Because the truth is too big for a single revelation. It has to be absorbed gradually, one mind at a time, until enough people understand what's really happening that disclosure becomes inevitable. The 9th craft is flying again, not just the one I integrated with, but others that are awakening as human consciousness evolves to the point where we can safely interface with technology that operates on principles we're only beginning to discover. Bob Lazar was right about the government hiding advanced technology, but he was wrong about why they were hiding it. It wasn't to maintain control or preserve military advantages. They were hiding it because they knew that once humanity started down the path of consciousness integration, there would be no way to stop the process, no way to contain evolution itself. And now that process has begun. The sky lights up most nights now if you know how to look. Ships that aren't quite alien and aren't quite human, piloted by intelligences that are becoming something new. The next step in the evolution of consciousness itself. Keep watching the skies, keep asking questions, keep preparing for a future that will arrive whether we're ready or not. The ninth craft was just the beginning, and we're all going to fly. Picture this. You're working security at one of Miami's busiest shopping centres on New Year's Eve, expecting nothing more than the usual drunk tourists and teenage troublemakers. But then you witness something that changes everything. Something the authorities desperately want erased from existence. Tonight's story comes from a special video suggestion by CJB64648, and it's a deep dive into one of the most covered-up incidents in recent memory. If you enjoy these mysterious tales that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories and drop your own story suggestions in the comments below. You never know, your idea might be our next investigation. My name is Marcus Rivera, and I used to be somebody who slept peacefully at night. That was before January 1st, 2020, before I became the kind of person who checks over their shoulder in grocery store parking lots and keeps burner phones in different states. Before I learned that some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. I'd been working security at Bayside Marketplace for 3 years when it happened. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly dealing with shoplifters pocketing designer knockoffs, breaking up fights between drunk college kids, and occasionally escorting belligerent tourists off the property. The pay was decent, the hours were steady, and in a city like Miami, steady work was a blessing I didn't take for granted. New Year's Eve was always busy. The marketplace transformed into a pulsing carnival of music, fireworks, and celebration. Street performers juggled fire while salsa dancers spun beneath strings of lights that turned the whole complex into something magical. I'd worked enough of these nights to know the rhythm, start quiet, build to chaos around midnight, then gradually wind down as people stumbled home or migrated to after-parties in South Beach. That night started exactly like all the others. I was stationed in the main security office, a cramped room lined with monitors showing feeds from 37 cameras throughout the complex. My partner, Julie Santos, was doing walking rounds while I kept watch on the screens. The usual suspects were out in force, teenagers trying to sneak alcohol, couples looking for dark corners to make out, and the occasional pickpocket working the crowd. At 11:47 p.m, my radio crackled to life. "Marcus, we've got a situation in the food court," Julie's voice came through tense and breathless. "Big fight. Multiple juveniles involved. I'm calling it in." I leaned forward in my chair, switching the main monitor to the food court cameras. Sure enough, I could see a cluster of people in the centre of the dining area, with several figures on the ground and others throwing punches. It looked like a typical teenage brawl that had gotten out of hand. The kind of thing that happened when too many high school crews ended up in the same space, with too much alcohol and testosterone. "Copy that," I radioed back, already pulling up the incident report form on my computer. "I've got eyes on it. Looks like 6, maybe 7 individuals involved." Within minutes, the place was swarming with Miami-Dade police. I watched through the cameras as officers flooded the food court, separating fighters and zip-tying hands behind backs. Standard procedure for this kind of thing. I'd seen it dozens of times before. But then Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with an order I'd never heard in 3 years of working security. "Rivera, I need you to stay in that office and monitor all camera feeds. Do not leave that room. We're looking for additional suspects who may have fled the scene." Additional suspects? I frowned at the monitors. From what I could see, they'd already detained everyone involved in the fight. But orders were orders, and I started systematically scanning through all 37 camera angles, looking for anyone running or acting suspicious. That's when I saw it. Or rather, that's when I saw him. Camera 23 covered the north parking lot, the area closest to the marina where most of the high-end tourists parked their rental cars. It was usually one of the quieter feeds. Not much foot traffic, just people coming and going from the restaurants along the water. But at 11:52 p.m, something moved across the screen that made me sit up straighter in my chair. A figure was walking through the parking lot, weaving between the police cars that had responded to the food court incident. At first glance, it looked like a person, tall, thin, wearing what appeared to be dark clothing. But something about the movement was wrong. It was too fluid, too purposeful. While everyone else in the area was either running toward the excitement or hurrying away from it, this figure moved with an almost predatory stillness. I leaned closer to the monitor and reached for the camera controls, zooming in for a better look. The figure was definitely tall, maybe 6.5 feet, possibly taller. The proportions seemed off somehow, like the limbs were too long for the torso, but the resolution wasn't good enough to be certain. As I adjusted the focus, trying to get a clearer image, the figure suddenly stopped walking and turned directly toward the camera. That's when I got my first real look at the face, or what should have been a face. The zoom wasn't perfect, but even through the pixelated digital enhancement, I could see that something was fundamentally wrong with this person's features. The head seemed too elongated, tilted at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for a human being, and the eyes reflected the parking lot lights like an animal's, throwing back twin points of cold white light. I blinked hard and refocused the camera, but when the image cleared again, the figure was gone. Not walking away, not running, simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. "What the hell?" I muttered, rewinding the feed to watch it again. But when I tried to replay the footage, the screen glitched. Digital static filled camera 23's feed, then cleared to show the parking lot as it should be. Empty police cars, no mysterious figure, nothing but concrete and streetlights. I switched to camera 22, which covered part of the same area. Normal footage. Camera 24, which caught the edge of that parking lot from a different angle. Also normal. Only camera 23 had malfunctioned, and only for the exact duration when that figure had been visible. My hands were shaking slightly as I cycled through the other feeds, looking for any sign of the tall figure. Nothing. It was as if those 60 seconds had been surgically removed from reality. I grabbed my radio, then hesitated. What exactly was I supposed to report? That I'd seen someone tall walking through a parking lot? That their eyes had reflected light in a way that seemed unnatural? That they'd somehow vanished from a digital recording? Instead, I made a note in the security log. 11:52 p.m. Possible equipment malfunction on camera 23. Will need technical inspection. But I knew it wasn't a malfunction, and deep down I suspected I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The food court incident was winding down by 12:15 a.m. Most of the teenagers had been released to their parents with citations, and only 2 were being transported to the station for more serious charges. The crowd of onlookers had dispersed, and the marketplace was returning to its normal New Year's Eve rhythm of music and celebration. Lieutenant Rodriguez came by the security office to check in. "Everything quiet on the cameras, Rivera?" I almost told him about camera 23. Almost. But something in his expression, a tightness around the eyes, a forced casualness in his voice, made me hesitate. "Yeah, all quiet," I said instead. "Just the usual crowd control stuff." He nodded but didn't leave immediately. "Listen, we might be here for a while longer. Some follow-up we need to do. Keep monitoring those feeds, okay? Any unusual activity, you radio it in immediately. Unusual how?" "Just unusual." He turned to go, then paused. "And Rivera? Don't leave the office until we give the all clear." "I mean it." After he left, I sat staring at the monitors with growing unease. In 3 years of working security, I'd never been told to stay in the office during an incident. Usually they wanted us out patrolling, being visible, helping to maintain order. This felt different. This felt like they were trying to keep me contained. At 12:45 a.m, curiosity got the better of me. Julie was still doing rounds somewhere on the south side of the complex. The radio had been quiet for 20 minutes. Most of the police seemed to have cleared out, leaving just a few units in the food court area. I made a decision that would change everything. I left the office. The night air hit me like a warm, humid wall as I stepped outside. Even in January, Miami nights carried that tropical weight that made your clothes stick to your skin within minutes. The sounds of celebration echoed off the water. Distant music, laughter, the occasional firecracker that someone had saved from earlier. I walked toward the north parking lot, telling myself I was just doing a routine patrol, that I wasn't specifically looking for any tall figures with reflective eyes, that I was just checking on the area where Camera 23 had experienced its malfunction. The parking lot looked normal. Police cars had left tyre marks on the asphalt, and there were a few pieces of trash that would need to be cleaned up in the morning, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to head back inside when I heard it, a sound like static electricity but deeper, like the air itself was being torn. I turned toward the sound and felt every hair on my arm stand up. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, like standing too close to a Tesla coil or walking beneath power lines during a storm. The air tasted metallic, sharp on my tongue, and then I saw it again. The figure was standing about 50 feet away, just beyond the edge of the parking lot lighting. It was definitely tall, taller than I'd estimated from the camera feed. 7 feet, maybe more. The proportions that had seemed off on the monitor were even more disturbing in person. The limbs were too long, the torso too narrow, and the head. The head was wrong in ways that my brain struggled to process. It stood perfectly still, watching me with those reflective eyes. There was an intelligence there that was unmistakably aware, unmistakably focused. It knew I was looking at it, and it was looking back. For a moment that felt like an eternity. We simply observed each other across that distance of concrete and shadow. I should have been terrified. I should have run, or screamed, or grabbed my radio. But instead I felt a strange sense of recognition, as if some part of me had been expecting this encounter. The figure tilted its head, too far to one side at an angle that would have snapped a human neck, and I heard that static sound again, stronger this time. The streetlights around me flickered. Then, without any visible movement, without taking a step or turning around, the figure simply wasn't there anymore. The absence was so complete that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. But the hair on my arms was still standing up, and the taste of copper lingered in my mouth. I stood in that parking lot for another 10 minutes, waiting for it to return, but the night had gone back to normal. The air temperature returned to its typical subtropical warmth. The streetlights stopped flickering, and the only sounds were the distant echoes of New Year's Eve festivities. When I finally walked back to the security office, my legs were unsteady and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I was barely back in my chair when the radio exploded with activity. All units, we have a code 7 in the north parking area. SWAT is en route. I repeat, SWAT is en route to Bayside Marketplace. Code 7. In 3 years of security work, I'd never heard that designation used. I grabbed the radio handbook from the desk drawer and flipped through the pages of police codes. Code 1 through Code 6 were all there. Everything from routine traffic stops to armed suspects. But there was no Code 7 listed. Through the security office windows, I could see flashing lights converging on the marketplace from multiple directions. More police cars than I'd ever seen for a single incident, plus several unmarked black vehicles that definitely weren't standard Miami-Dade units. Rivera. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came through my radio, sharp and urgent. "I need you out of that office." "Now." "Sir? I thought you wanted me monitoring the cameras." "Plans have changed. Exit the building immediately and report to the main parking area. Do not return to the security office under any circumstances." I looked at the monitors one more time, scanning for any sign of the tall figure. All cameras showed normal activity. Police cars, officers moving with purpose, nothing unusual. Camera 23 was working perfectly again. As I stood up to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. The timestamp on camera 23's feed was wrong. While all the other monitors showed the correct time, 1:23 a.m., camera 23's timestamp was stuck at 11:51 p.m. 11:51. 1 minute before I'd first seen the figure, I grabbed a pen and quickly wrote down the discrepancy on a piece of paper, shoving it into my pocket as I headed for the door. Outside, the scene was unlike anything I'd experienced in my years working security. The entire north end of the marketplace had been cordoned off with police tape, and officers in full tactical gear were sweeping through the area with equipment I didn't recognise. Some of it looked like standard metal detectors, but other devices appeared more sophisticated. Handheld screens that glowed with complex readouts, instruments that emitted soft beeping sounds as they moved. More concerning were the men in plain clothes. They weren't Miami-Dade police, that much was obvious. They wore identical dark suits despite the humid night, and they moved with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of federal training. One of them was directing the SWAT team's sweep patterns while speaking quietly into a radio that looked far more advanced than anything in our security arsenal. I found Lieutenant Rodriguez near the entrance to the marketplace, but when I approached him, his expression was grim. "Rivera, I need you to go home. Your shift is over." "Sir, we're scheduled until 6 a.m. "Not tonight. Consider this paid leave. Don't come back until you hear from us." Before I could ask any more questions, he was walking away, leaving me standing alone while tactical teams swarmed the area where I'd seen the figure just an hour earlier. As I walked to my car, I passed close enough to one of the SWAT officers to overhear part of his radio conversation. "Target is no longer in the immediate area. Expanding search perimeter to include marina and surrounding blocks. Be advised, we're dealing with a mobile situation. Containment protocols are in effect until further notice." Target not suspect, not individual. Target. I drove home with more questions than answers, but I had the sinking feeling that asking those questions was going to get me into more trouble than I was prepared for. The next morning I called the security office to check in, and was told that all camera footage from New Year's Eve had been accidentally corrupted during a system update. 3 years of reliable digital storage, and the one night when I needed to review the feeds, everything had been wiped clean. I should have kept my mouth shut. Looking back, that's the decision that would have saved my job, my friendships, and quite possibly my life. But I'd seen something that defied explanation, and the official response was a cover-up so obvious it was almost insulting. The first person I told was Julie. We met for coffee 3 days after the incident at a little Cuban place on Calle Ocho that we'd been to dozens of times before. Julie had been working security even longer than me, and if anyone would understand the strangeness of what had happened, it would be her. "The whole thing was weird, Marcus," she agreed, stirring sugar into her cortadito. "I've never seen that much police response for a food court fight, and the way they cleared us out afterward, it felt like they were trying to hide something." I leaned forward across the small table. "Julie, I think I saw what they were trying to hide." I told her everything. The figure on camera 23, the way it had vanished from the digital feed, the encounter in the parking lot, the reflective eyes and impossible proportions. I described the static electricity feeling, the way the streetlights had flickered, the sudden absence that had felt like a hole torn in reality itself. Julie listened without interrupting, her expression growing more sceptical with each detail. "Marcus," she said when I finished, "you know how that sounds, right?" "I know exactly how it sounds. But I also know what I saw. You were working a 12-hour shift on New Year's Eve. You'd been staring at security monitors for hours. Sometimes our eyes play tricks on us, especially when we're tired and stressed. It was the response I'd expected, but it still stung. The camera malfunction wasn't in my head, Julie. The timestamp error wasn't fatigue. Something happened that night, and they're covering it up. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Even if something strange did happen, what are you planning to do about it? File a report? Call the newspapers? They'd laugh you out of the building. But I was already past that point. The need to understand what I'd witnessed had become an obsession that was keeping me awake at night. I'd spent the past 3 days researching everything I could find about unexplained sightings in Miami, government cover-ups, and cases where security footage had mysteriously disappeared. That night, I created an anonymous account on Reddit and posted a carefully worded description of the incident on several conspiracy theory forums. Security guard at major Miami tourist location witnessed unexplained figure during police response to disturbance. Figure showed non-human characteristics and disappeared from digital surveillance during apparent equipment malfunction. Heavy federal presence followed. All footage from incidents subsequently destroyed. Looking for information about similar encounters. The responses were immediate and varied. Most were the usual internet skeptics calling me crazy or asking for proof I couldn't provide. But a few responses stood out. User blackout Miami. Similar incident reported at government center in December. Tall figure seen on security cameras. Footage disappeared. Witnesses transferred or fired. User eyes on the skies. Check out Project Blue Book files from the 1960s. Miami has a history of unexplained encounters that get buried. User whistleblower warn. Delete this post immediately. They monitor these forums. You're already on their radar. I didn't delete the post. Instead, I started documenting everything I could remember about the incident, writing detailed accounts of the encounter and saving them in multiple locations. I scanned the handwritten note about the timestamp error and uploaded it to several cloud storage accounts. Within 48 hours, every single one of my posts had been removed by forum moderators, citing unverified claims and potential misinformation. That's when I realised I was dealing with something much bigger than a simple cover-up. On Monday morning, I reported to work as usual, expecting to return to normal security duties. Instead, I was called into the Human Resources office before my shift even started. Margaret Chen, the HR manager, was sitting behind her desk with a file folder and an expression that told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Marcus, we need to discuss a serious violation of company policy that occurred during your shift on New Year's Eve. My stomach dropped. What kind of violation? According to Lieutenant Rodriguez's report, you abandoned your assigned post despite direct orders to remain in the security office. You also failed to report unusual activity that may have been relevant to an ongoing police investigation. I stared at her in disbelief. I was told to leave the office. Rodriguez himself ordered me to... That's not what his report says. According to the official record, you left your post without authorization and failed to cooperate with law enforcement during a critical incident. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is your termination notice, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you're prohibited from returning to Bayside Marketplace property. I tried to argue, to explain what had really happened, but Margaret was already standing up, signalling that the conversation was over. I'd strongly advise you to avoid discussing the details of your employment here with anyone, she said, as 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your address on file. As I was escorted out of the building where I'd worked for 3 years, I caught a glimpse of my replacement already sitting in the security office, monitoring the same 37 cameras that had shown me something I wasn't supposed to see. That afternoon, I called Julie to tell her what had happened. Her phone went straight to voicemail. When I tried her again the next day, I got a message saying the number was no longer in service. I never spoke to Julie Santos again. Losing my job should have been a wake-up call. A rational person would have taken the hint, moved on, and found new employment without asking too many questions about why their previous position had ended so abruptly. I was not a rational person. Instead of backing down, I doubled down on my investigation. If they were willing to fire me to keep me quiet, then whatever I'd witnessed was even more significant than I'd initially believed. I started by mapping out every business in the Bayside marketplace complex, identifying potential witnesses who might have seen something unusual on New Year's Eve. Most of the shops and restaurants would have been closed by the time of the incident, but there were a few 24-hour establishments that would have had staff present. My first stop was Marina Cafe, a small coffee shop that stayed open late to serve the restaurant workers getting off their shifts. The night manager, a woman named Rosa Gutierrez, remembered the police activity but initially claimed she hadn't seen anything unusual. Just a lot of cops, she said, wiping down tables with nervous energy, more than I'd ever seen for a teenage fight. Made me wonder if something bigger was going on. I pressed gently, explaining that I'd been working security that night and was trying to understand the full scope of what had happened. After some hesitation, Rosa looked around to make sure we were alone in the cafe. There was something else, she said quietly. Around midnight, just before all the police arrived, I heard this sound. Like a growl, but deeper. It made the windows vibrate. A growl? Not from a person, not from any animal I've ever heard. It came from outside, somewhere near the marina. Lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I looked out the window but didn't see anything. Scared the hell out of me, though. She paused, then added, "And the weird thing is, all the seagulls disappeared. You know how they usually hang around the docks all night looking for scraps? After that sound, I didn't see a single bird for the rest of my shift, like they all just left." My second significant lead came from Miguel Santos, who worked the night shift at the marina's boat rental office. Miguel was more reluctant to talk, but when I mentioned that I'd been fired for asking questions about that night, his attitude changed. "They got to you too, huh?" he said, glancing around nervously. "Same thing happened to my cousin. He was working valet parking that night. Saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Next day, fired for performance issues. 20-year employee with a spotless record. What did he see? Something by the loading docks. Said it looked like a person at first, but when he got closer, he realised it was all wrong. Too tall, moving in a way that made his skin crawl. When he tried to report it, his supervisor told him to forget about it and sent him home early." Miguel pulled out his phone and showed me a grainy photo. He managed to snap this before his phone mysteriously reset itself. The image was blurry and poorly lit, but I could make out a tall, dark shape near one of the loading dock areas. The proportions looked wrong, elongated and angular in a way that suggested it wasn't human. "Can you send me this photo?" "Already tried. Every time I attempt to forward it or upload it anywhere, the file gets corrupted. My cousin's the only one who has the original, and his phone won't connect to any networks anymore. Just displays an error message whenever he tries to access cellular or Wi-Fi." The pattern was becoming clear. Multiple witnesses, all experiencing technological problems when they tried to document or share what they'd seen, all facing professional consequences for asking questions. But the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch at a small Dominican restaurant in Little Havana when I overheard two men at the next table discussing something in hushed tones. One of them mentioned Bayside Marketplace and New Year's Eve, which immediately caught my attention. "Never seen anything like it in 20 years on the force," one was saying. "When those federal boys showed up, they took control of everything, told us to forget what we'd seen, and threatened our pensions if we talked." I turned slightly to get a better look at the speakers. Both appeared to be in their 50s, with the bearing of former law enforcement. The one doing most of the talking was a large man with greying hair and tired eyes. After they finished eating, I followed them out to the parking lot and approached carefully. "Excuse me," I said. "I couldn't help overhearing you mention Bayside Marketplace. Were you there on New Year's Eve?" The man who'd been talking immediately tensed up. "Who's asking?" Someone who was there too. Someone who got fired for asking the wrong questions. Something in my tone must have convinced him that I wasn't a threat, because his posture relaxed slightly. "You're the security guard. Rivera, right?" I nodded, surprised that he knew my name. "I'm Detective Frank Morrison." Was Detective Morrison anyway. Retired early after that night. He gestured to his companion. "This is Detective Luis Vargas, also retired. What did you see out there?" Morrison looked around the parking lot, checking for any observers, then made a decision. "Not here. Too exposed. You want answers? Meet us at the Whale Harbour tonight at 8. Come alone." The Whale Harbour was a dive bar in Key Biscayne, the kind of place where off-duty cops went to drink and complain about their jobs. When I arrived at 8, Morrison and Vargas were already there, sitting in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. "Before we start," Morrison said as I sat down, "you need to understand that everything we're about to tell you is off the record. We've got families, pensions, and a lot to lose. But what happened that night, it's been eating at us for months." He took a long drink from his beer, then began to speak. "We were called in as backup for the food court incident. Standard crowd control stuff, nothing unusual. But about 20 minutes in, we got new orders. Federal agents had arrived and were taking over the scene. They wanted us to establish a perimeter around the entire north end of the complex." Federal agents from which agency? That's the thing. They never identified themselves. No badges, no credentials shown to us. Just orders passed down from the lieutenant that we were to cooperate fully and ask no questions. Vargas leaned forward. "About an hour in, they brought in some kind of specialised equipment. Not standard law enforcement gear. These devices were scanning for something, and when they found it, the whole operation changed." "Changed how?" "They called for a containment unit," Morrison said. "Black trucks, unmarked vehicles, personnel in hazmat-style suits. They cordoned off a section of the parking lot and brought in what looked like a mobile laboratory." "Did you see what they were containing?" Morrison and Vargas exchanged glances. "We saw them load something into one of the trucks," Vargas said slowly. "Something large, covered in a metallic tarp. But before they sealed the container, the tarp shifted." He paused, seeming to gather courage to continue. "I got a glimpse of what was underneath. It was... I don't know what it was. Not human. Not any kind of animal I've ever seen. It was tall, probably 7 feet or more, with limbs that bent in ways that didn't make sense. And the skin... The skin looked wrong," Morrison finished. "Like it was reflecting light from underneath. Almost metallic, but organic at the same time. Was it alive? I don't know. It wasn't moving. But there was something about it that felt... aware. Like even unconscious or sedated, it was still somehow present." They told me that after the containment unit left, all officers involved were called into individual meetings with federal agents. Each was told that the incident was classified under national security provisions, and that discussing any details with unauthorised personnel would result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. "Most of the guys were fine with that," Morrison said. "They got overtime pay, a commendation for their service, and orders to forget the whole thing. But Vargas and I, we'd seen too much. We started asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "Whether this was an isolated incident, whether there had been similar events in other cities, whether the public had a right to know that something non-human was being covered up by our own government." Within a week, both detectives had been called into internal affairs investigations. Morrison was accused of excessive force during an unrelated arrest from 6 months earlier. Vargas was investigated for financial irregularities in his expense reports. "Nothing they could make stick," Vargas said, but the message was clear. Keep quiet or face consequences. Both men had chosen early retirement rather than continue to work under the threat of constant scrutiny. "The thing is," Morrison said as we prepared to leave, "this isn't the first time something like this has happened in Miami. We started digging into old cases, looking for patterns. There have been at least 3 similar incidents in the past 5 years. Always the same response. Immediate federal takeover, memory hold within 48 hours, witnesses either discredited or disappeared." He handed me a piece of paper with several addresses written on it. "These are the locations of the other incidents. If you're serious about investigating this, that's where you should start. But Rivera..." I looked up from the paper. "Be careful. Whatever you saw that night, whoever's covering it up, they've got resources we can't even imagine. They've already destroyed your career. Don't let them destroy your life." The first address Morrison had given me was a construction site in downtown Miami, where, according to police records, there had been a gas leak evacuation in March 2019. The official story was that workers had detected dangerous levels of methane and called in hazmat teams as a precaution. But when I spoke to Carlos Mendez, a construction foreman who'd been working the site that day, I got a very different account. "Gas leak my ass," Carlos said when I met him at a job site in Coral Gables. "I was the safety supervisor on that project. I know gas leaks. and what we saw that morning wasn't any kind of leak. According to Carlos, workers had discovered something while excavating for a new foundation. Something that had been buried about 12 feet underground, wrapped in what appeared to be a metallic cocoon or shell. It was the size of a person, maybe bigger. The outer layer was like nothing I'd ever seen, part organic, part technological. When we tried to cut through it to see what was inside, the whole thing started humming. Humming? Like electrical equipment, but alive somehow, and the temperature around it dropped about 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. Our breath was visible, right there in the middle of a Miami summer. Within hours, federal agents had arrived and declared the site a potential environmental hazard. All workers were evacuated, sworn to secrecy, and paid substantial bonuses for their discretion. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before, Carlos continued, extracted whatever was buried there and covered the whole thing up. Next day, official reports said it was a false alarm about gas levels. The second address led me to Virginia Key, where in August 2020, several witnesses had reported seeing strange lights over the water during what authorities described as military training exercises. Maria Rodriguez, who lived in a waterfront apartment that overlooked the bay, had been one of those witnesses. It wasn't aircraft, she told me as we sat on her balcony, looking out over the same stretch of water. The lights moved in ways that defied physics. They would hover motionless, then accelerate to impossible speeds, then stop instantly. No sound, no visible means of propulsion. She'd tried to record the lights with her phone, but every video came out distorted or completely black. The strange part was what happened afterward. For 3 days, no marine life was visible in the bay. No fish, no dolphins, no birds. It was like every living thing had fled the area. When Maria had tried to report her sighting to local news stations, she was told that the military had already provided an explanation and that the matter was closed. The third address was the most disturbing. It led me to a residential neighbourhood in Homestead where, in November 2021, a family had reported a break-in with unusual circumstances. According to the police report I obtained through a records request, the Rodriguez family had called 911 claiming that intruders with non-human characteristics had entered their home during the night. I found Elena Rodriguez working at a local grocery store. She was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who became visibly uncomfortable when I mentioned the incident. "I don't talk about that anymore," she said immediately. "My family. We've moved on." But when I pressed gently, explaining that I'd experienced something similar and was looking for answers, she agreed to meet me after her shift. "They came through the walls," she told me as we sat in her car in the grocery store parking lot. "Not through the doors or windows, through the walls themselves, like they could pass through solid matter." Eleanor described 3 figures, all tall and unnaturally thin, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed somehow incomplete. They had moved through her house silently, examining her family members as they slept, before departing the same way they had arrived. My youngest son, Diego, he woke up during it. He saw one of them standing over his bed. It looked down at him, and Diego said its eyes were like mirrors, reflecting everything but showing nothing. When Elena had called the police, they'd initially responded as if it were a standard home invasion. But when the responding officers heard her description of the intruders, everything changed. Within an hour, federal agents had arrived and conducted extensive interviews with the entire family. "They told us it was a shared hallucination caused by a gas leak," Elena said bitterly. But there was no gas leak, and hallucinations don't leave physical evidence. She showed me a photo on her phone. 3 perfectly circular indentations in her hardwood floor, each about 6 inches in diameter and a 1/4 inch deep. These appeared where they stood. The agents tried to convince us they'd always been there, but I'd lived in that house for 15 years. I knew every mark on those floors. After the investigation, Eleanor's family had been relocated to a different neighbourhood and given new jobs. Her husband, who'd been most vocal about the incident, had died in a car accident 6 months later, single-vehicle collision, ruled accidental. "That's when I stopped talking," Lena finished. "Whatever they are, whatever they want, someone very powerful is protecting them, and people who ask too many questions. Things happen to them. I was beginning to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a cover-up of a single incident. It was a systematic suppression of information about ongoing contact with non-human entities. But I was about to learn just how closely I was being monitored. I just returned to my apartment after meeting with Elena when I noticed the man standing across the street. He was wearing a plain grey suit despite the Miami heat, and he was looking directly at my building. When I looked out the window again 10 minutes later, he was still there. The next morning, as I left for another interview with a potential witness, the same man was waiting by my car. "Mr. Rivera," he said as I approached. His voice was calm, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. "I think we need to have a conversation." He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but something about his presence made my skin crawl. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colourless, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was cataloguing every detail of my appearance. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been watching your recent activities with great interest. Your investigation into events at Bayside Marketplace, your conversations with former police officers, your meetings with the Rodriguez family." The fact that he knew about Elena immediately told me how thoroughly I was being monitored. "I'm just looking for answers," I said. "No, Mr. Rivera. You're looking for trouble, and you're very close to finding more than you can handle." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, handing it to me. "These are photographs taken outside your apartment building over the past week. Notice anything interesting?" I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were a dozen surveillance photos showing me entering and leaving my building, walking to my car, meeting with various people. But it wasn't the photos themselves that made my blood run cold. It was the timestamp on each image. They had been taken from angles that should have been impossible, high above street level, as if the photographer had been floating in mid-air. And in several of the photos I could see partial reflections in windows and car mirrors that showed the photographer's position. The camera had been at least 30 feet off the ground. "We know everything you've been doing, everyone you've spoken to, every document you've accessed. You think you're investigating us, but we've been studying you since the moment you left that security office." He paused, letting that sink in. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see. That was an accident, an unfortunate coincidence. But instead of accepting the logical explanation and moving on with your life, you've chosen to pursue answers that could endanger national security." National security? What kind of national security requires covering up contact with non-human entities? The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those pale eyes. The kind that prevents mass panic, economic collapse, and the breakdown of social order. Do you really think the public is ready to learn that they're not alone in the universe? That beings with technology beyond our understanding have been operating on Earth for decades? So you admit it. These things, whatever they are, they're real. I admit nothing. But I'm offering you a choice, Mr. Rivera. Walk away now, and you can return to your normal life. We can arrange new employment, perhaps relocate you to a different city if you prefer. All we ask is your silence. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that there are worse things than being fired from a security job." He turned to go, then paused. "You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires and other measures will be considered necessary." That night I found my car window smashed and my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but every electronic device I owned had been mysteriously reset to factory settings. My computer's hard drive had been wiped, my phone had been remotely erased, and even my digital camera's memory card was blank. The message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time, and they had technology that made conventional security meaningless. But instead of intimidating me into silence, the threat only reinforced my determination to find the truth. I spent the next day acquiring new equipment and creating backup plans that I hoped would be hardest to detect. Burner phones paid for with cash, anonymous email accounts accessed from public computers, physical documents stored in multiple locations. If they wanted to play surveillance games, I was going to make them work for it. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Detective Morrison. He called me on one of my new phones with information that changed everything. "Rivera, I've been doing some digging since our conversation. Found someone you need to meet. former federal agent who worked these kinds of cases before he had a crisis of conscience. The meeting was arranged for a small cafe in Coral Gables. I arrived early and chose a table with clear sightlines to all entrances, paranoid now about being followed or monitored. The man who approached my table looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was thin, pale, with the kind of nervous energy that came from constantly looking over his shoulder. "You're Rivera," he said without preamble as he sat down. "I'm Agent Thompson. Former Agent Thompson, I should say. Morrison said you worked these cases." For 12 years I was part of a classified program that dealt with what we called anomalous contact events. What you witnessed at Bayside was just the latest in a long series of incidents that have been occurring with increasing frequency. Thompson looked around the cafe nervously before continuing. "The entities you saw, we call them visitors, have been making contact for decades. Not invasion-style contact, more like observation. Study. They seem to be monitoring human development, occasionally taking samples or specimens. Specimens? Missing persons cases that never get solved. People who vanish without a trace, often from areas where visitor activity has been detected. The official position is that there's no connection, but the patterns are unmistakable." He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. "These are copies of classified reports from similar incidents across the country. Miami has had more visitor activity than almost anywhere else, probably because of its location and population density." I opened the folder and found myself looking at government documents marked with classification levels I'd never seen before. Incident reports, witness statements, technical analyses of recovered materials. Why are you showing me this? Because the program is changing direction. For years the policy was containment and secrecy. Document the encounters, clean up the evidence, silence the witnesses. But recently there's been a shift toward active cooperation. Cooperation? Trade agreements, technology exchanges. The visitors have been offering advanced science in return for access to human subjects and freedom to operate without interference. Thompson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Some people in the government think this is humanity's chance to make a quantum leap in technological development. Others think we're selling our species to entities whose motives we don't understand." He pointed to a specific document in the folder. "That's a report from 3 months ago. A visitor delegation meeting with Pentagon officials to discuss expanded operations. Your incident at Bayside was part of a new protocol. Instead of completely hiding their activities, they're testing public response to limited exposure." "You mean they wanted me to see them?" "Not you specifically, but someone. They need to gauge how humans react to direct contact, how effectively the cover-up mechanisms work, how much pressure it takes to silence witnesses." The implications were staggering. I hadn't stumbled onto a secret. I'd been used as a test subject in some kind of psychological experiment. What happened to the entity they captured at Bayside? Transported to a secure facility in Nevada. But Rivera, here's the thing. It wasn't captured. It was surrendered. The visitors sometimes allow us to take individuals for study as part of the cooperation agreement. Thompson stood up to leave but turned back one more time. "There's a transportation scheduled for tonight. They're moving the Bayside specimen to a different facility, and there's going to be a window of vulnerability during the transfer. If someone wanted to document proof of the program." He left an address written on a napkin and walked away without another word. The address Thompson had given me was for a warehouse in the industrial district near the port. According to my research, it was officially owned by a shipping company, but tax records showed it had been leased to a federal agency under a classified contract. I arrived at 11 p.m. and found a position across the street where I could observe the warehouse without being seen. The building was surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire, and I could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter. At 11:45, a convoy of black vehicles arrived. 3 SUVs and a large truck that looked like it had been modified for special cargo. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles and began preparing for some kind of operation. I'd managed to acquire a camera with a powerful telephoto lens, and I started documenting everything I could see. The agents were using equipment that looked far more advanced than standard law enforcement gear. Devices that glowed with soft light, instruments that seemed to scan the air itself. At midnight they brought out the container. It was roughly the size of a coffin, made from some kind of metallic material that seemed to shift and flow in the light. 2 agents carried it carefully to the modified truck, handling it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. But as they loaded the container, something went wrong. One of the agents stumbled, and the container tilted at an angle that caused part of its contents to become visible through a transparent section I hadn't noticed before. Through my camera lens, I got a clear view of what was inside. It was the entity from Bayside, but it was awake. Those reflective eyes were open and aware, looking directly through the transparent section toward the warehouse where I was hidden. Even from a distance of several hundred feet, I felt the same electric sensation I'd experienced in the parking lot. The same sense of being observed by an intelligence that was fundamentally alien. But what happened next changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The entity moved its hand, or what passed for a hand, and placed it against the transparent barrier. Not struggling to escape, not trying to break free, but making what appeared to be a deliberate gesture. It was waving, not at the agents surrounding the container, but at me. Somehow it knew I was there, knew I was watching, and was acknowledging my presence. I kept shooting photographs, documenting every detail of the transfer process. But as the convoy prepared to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the agents had pulled out a device that looked like a tablet computer, but the screen was displaying what appeared to be a real-time satellite view of the industrial district. As I watched through my camera, a red dot appeared on the screen marking the exact building where I was hidden. They knew I was there. The agent with the tablet spoke into his radio, and I saw several other agents begin moving in my direction. I had maybe 2 minutes before they reached my position. I quickly ejected the memory card from my camera and slipped it into my shoe, then grabbed a backup card I'd brought and put it in the camera. If they caught me, I wanted them to find decoy footage that wouldn't reveal what I'd actually captured. But I didn't wait around to be caught. I slipped out of the warehouse through a back entrance and made my way through a maze of industrial buildings toward where I'd parked my car. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, engines starting, radios crackling, the systematic search of a trained tactical team. I reached my car just as the first agent appeared at the end of the alley. Instead of driving toward the main road, which they would certainly be watching, I headed deeper into the industrial district, using my knowledge of Miami's back streets to evade the pursuit. It took me 3 hours of careful driving through residential neighborhoods and side streets before I was confident I'd lost them. When I finally made it home, I found my apartment had been searched again, but this time they'd left a message. Written on my bathroom mirror in what appeared to be some kind of luminescent ink was a single word: run. I didn't need to be told twice. Within an hour I had grabbed essential documents, the memory card with the photographs, and enough cash to disappear for a while. But before I left Miami, I had one more stop to make. I drove to Bayside Marketplace one last time, parking in the same lot where I'd first encountered the entity 3 months earlier. The place looked normal, tourists taking late-night photos, couples walking along the marina, the usual mix of activity that made Miami a 24-hour city. But I knew that beneath this normal facade something extraordinary was being hidden. I walked to the exact spot where I'd seen the tall figure that first night, looking for any signs of the encounter that had changed my life. The concrete looked the same, the lighting was unchanged, but I noticed something I'd missed before. There were small circular marks in the pavement, the same type of indentations Elena Rodriguez had shown me in her house. 3 perfect circles, each about 6 inches in diameter, arranged in a triangle pattern. They weren't damage from construction or wear patterns from foot traffic. They were too precise, too intentional. They looked like landing marks. As I knelt to examine them more closely, I heard a familiar sound, that electric static that seemed to come from the air itself. I stood up slowly and found myself face to face with the same entity I'd encountered months before. It was standing about 10 feet away, perfectly still, watching me with those reflective eyes. But this time, I wasn't afraid. After everything I'd learned, everything I'd discovered about the cover-up and the cooperation agreements, I realised that this wasn't a predator or an invader. It was a researcher, and I was part of its study. We regarded each other in silence for several long moments. Then, Impossibly it spoke. The voice didn't come through the air. It appeared directly in my mind, like a thought that wasn't my own. You have seen, you have documented, you have chosen to pursue truth despite consequences. Why? I asked. Not sure if I was speaking aloud or thinking the question. Your species stands at a threshold. Some among you are ready for broader contact. Others resist change. We study both responses. The government knows about you. They're working with you. Some among your leaders seek cooperation, others seek control. The outcome is not yet determined. What do you want from us? To understand, to evaluate, to determine if your species can join the broader community of intelligence. And if we can't? The entity tilted its head at that impossible angle, considering the question. Then you will remain isolated until you are ready, or until you are no longer capable of choice. The implications of that statement sent a chill through me, but before I could ask for clarification, the entity was speaking again. You have served your purpose, Marcus Rivera. Your reactions, your investigations, your resistance to suppression, all have provided valuable data. I was an experiment. You were a volunteer. You chose to see when others chose to look away. You chose to investigate when others chose to forget. You chose truth when others chose comfort. What happens now? Now you choose again. Accept silence and return to your previous existence, or continue seeking truth and accept the consequences. The entity reached into what appeared to be a pocket in its dark clothing and pulled out a small metallic device about the size of a smartphone. This contains evidence of our presence that cannot be erased or corrupted by your government's technology. Use it wisely. It placed the device on the ground between us, then stepped backward. We will be watching, Marcus Rivera. Your choices will influence how we proceed with your species. And then, just as it had before, the entity simply wasn't there anymore. I stood alone in the Bayside parking lot holding an alien device that contained proof of everything I'd suspected. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from a small motel room in Colorado, the latest stop in a journey that has taken me across the country, as I stay ahead of the federal agents who are still hunting for me. The device the entity gave me has proven to be everything it promised, irrefutable evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. I've uploaded copies of the files to dozens of secure servers, sent copies to journalists and researchers around the world, and created enough redundancy to ensure that the truth can't be completely suppressed. The response has been exactly what you'd expect. Most mainstream media outlets have ignored the evidence or dismissed it as elaborate hoaxes. Government officials have denied everything while simultaneously launching investigations into national security breaches. The usual debunkers have produced increasingly elaborate explanations for why, obviously alien technology must be some kind of military prototype. But some people are listening. Some people are investigating. Some people are asking the right questions. I've been contacted by witnesses from dozens of other incidents. Construction workers who found buried artifacts, military personnel who encountered craft that defied physics, scientists who were ordered to destroy research that proved too inconvenient. We're building a network of people who refuse to accept the official silence. People who believe that humanity deserves to know the truth about our place in the universe. The federal agents are still hunting for me. I change locations every few days, use only cash, avoid any kind of electronic communication that can be traced. But I'm not running scared anymore. I'm running strategic. Every day I stay free as another day to gather more evidence, to contact more witnesses, to build a case that even the most sophisticated cover-up can't suppress. Because I understand now that this isn't just about what I saw at Bayside Marketplace. It's about the future of human civilization, about whether we'll be allowed to make informed choices about contact with non-human intelligence, or whether those choices will be made for us by a small group of government officials and corporate interests. The entities, the visitors, whatever we choose to call them, are real. They're here, they're studying us, and they're waiting to see what kind of species we really are. Some in our government have chosen cooperation and secrecy. They've decided that humanity isn't ready for the truth, that panic and social collapse would be inevitable if people knew we weren't alone. I believe they're wrong. I believe that people deserve to know, that we have the right to participate in decisions about our own future. That truth, however disturbing, is better than comfortable lies. So I'm going to keep running, keep investigating, keep documenting. I'm going to find every witness, gather every piece of evidence, and build a case so comprehensive that even the most sophisticated disinformation campaign can't discredit it. They took my job, my friends, my normal life, but they can't take what I saw that night at Bayside. They can't erase the truth. And as long as I'm alive and free, I'm going to make sure that truth eventually reaches the people who deserve to know it. The hunt continues. My name is Marcus Rivera, and this is my testimony. If something happens to me, if I disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, remember that the truth doesn't die with the messenger. They're here, they're watching, and humanity's future hangs in the balance of choices we're not even being allowed to make. The question isn't whether we're alone in the universe. The question is whether we're brave enough to handle the answer. What if the objects we see streaking through our solar system aren't just cosmic debris? What if some of them are watching, waiting, and following a pattern we're only beginning to understand? Tonight's story takes us into the world of deep space surveillance, government cover-ups, and the terrifying possibility that we're not alone, and haven't been for decades. If you enjoy stories like this that blur the line between science and the unknown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more content that will keep you questioning what's really out there, and drop a comment below letting me know what time you're listening and where you're from around the world. I love connecting with fellow night owls and mystery seekers. Now, let's dive into the Atlas pattern. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Room temperature caffeine was better than no caffeine, especially when you're staring at endless streams of astronomical data at 3:47 a.m. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm what you might charitably call a data analyst for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Network, though glorified pattern-matching drone would be more accurate. Most nights were the same routine: cross-reference orbital trajectories, flag anything that deviated from predicted paths, file reports that maybe 3 people would ever read, asteroids, comets, space junk. It all blurred together into points of light moving predictably through the void. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills and kept me close to the stars I'd loved since childhood. That night was different, though I didn't realise it at first. I was reviewing data from 3I Atlas, the interstellar comet that had been making headlines for the past few months. Unlike most comets that originate from our own solar system, this one had come from deep space, only the 3rd confirmed interstellar visitor we'd ever detected. The media loved stories about cosmic wanderers, and 3I Atlas fit the bill perfectly. Except something was wrong with the data. At first I thought it was an equipment malfunction. Comets develop distinctive comas, those glowing halos of gas and dust, when they get close to the sun. It's basic astronomy. But according to my instruments, 3I Atlas showed no signs of outgassing despite being well within the zone, where it should have been blazing like a celestial torch. I pulled up the trajectory data and felt my stomach drop. The orbital path showed tiny corrections, minute adjustments that were impossibly precise for a chunk of ice and rock tumbling through space. I ran the calculations 3 times, then a 4th, but the result was always the same. 3I Atlas wasn't following a natural ballistic trajectory, it was steering. My hands trembled as I documented everything. Spectral analysis, trajectory corrections, the complete absence of a coma. I cross-referenced the data with our deep space tracking stations and found the same anomalies reflected across multiple observation points. This wasn't instrument error, this was real. I drafted my report with meticulous care, attaching every piece of supporting data I could find. The implications were staggering. If 3I Atlas was under intelligent control, it meant we were being visited by something far more sophisticated than a wandering comet. I encrypted the files and submitted them through official channels, then sat back in my chair and tried to process what I'd discovered. Sleep was impossible. I spent the remaining hours before dawn triple-checking my work, running additional simulations, and preparing for the inevitable barrage of questions that would come once my superiors saw the report. Part of me was terrified, but another part was electric with excitement. This could be the discovery that changed everything. When I arrived at work the next morning, I went straight to my computer to pull up the backup files of my observation log. The screen flickered to life, and my blood ran cold. The entire night's work was gone. In place of my carefully documented anomalies was a single line of text. Instrument error, data invalid, log purged. I tried accessing the backup servers, but every copy had been scrubbed clean. It was as if the past 12 hours of work had never happened. My report had vanished without a trace, leaving no evidence that I'd ever observed anything unusual about 3i Atlas. But I remembered every detail. The trajectory corrections, the missing coma, the impossible precision of its path through space. Someone had wiped my data, but they couldn't wipe my memory. I sat in my cubicle, staring at the blank screen, and realised I was no longer just a data analyst. I had become a witness to something that someone very powerful didn't want the world to know. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow across rows of identical workstations. My colleagues went about their morning routines, oblivious to the fact that evidence of possible extraterrestrial intelligence had been discovered and then systematically erased overnight. I wanted to scream, to shake them all and tell them what I'd seen. Instead, I opened a new observation log and tried to pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I just didn't know how much yet. I spent the morning trying to reconstruct my observations from memory, but without the raw data, it felt like chasing shadows. Every time I pulled up 3i Atlas in the current tracking system, the trajectory looked perfectly normal. Textbook comet behaviour with no signs of the anomalies I'd documented just hours before. Around lunch, I decided to reach out to Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a colleague at the Palomar Observatory who'd been tracking the same object. If anyone else had noticed the irregularities, it would be her. I kept the email casual, asking about her observations and mentioning that I'd seen some interesting data patterns the night before. Her reply came back within minutes. "Hey Marcus, nothing unusual on our end. Standard comet behaviour all the way. Maybe check your instrument calibration." The dismissal stung, but I couldn't blame her. Without the data to back up my claims, I sounded like another conspiracy theorist seeing patterns in random noise. I spent the afternoon reviewing archived observations, looking for any trace of what I'd seen, but came up empty. When I got home that evening, I went straight to my home office to fire up my personal workstation. If the official channels had been compromised, maybe I could find some trace of the truth in my own files. I'd been in the habit of backing up interesting observations to my personal cloud storage, just in case. The computer took longer than usual to boot up. When the desktop finally appeared, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. Files were missing, folders had been rearranged, my backup directories were completely empty. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the access logs. According to the timestamps, my computer had been remotely accessed while I was at work. Someone had systematically gone through my personal files and deleted anything related to astronomical observations from the past month. I was reaching for my phone to call tech support when it rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello? Marcus Webb?" The voice was calm, professional, with a slight electronic distortion that suggested it was being run through a voice changer. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you avoid making a very serious mistake. You filed a report last night about anomalous observations of Object 3i Atlas. That report has been classified and removed from all systems." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Webb, we know exactly what you saw, and we know you backed up the data. We also know you've already reached out to colleagues trying to verify your observations. This is your only warning. You didn't see what you think you saw. Drop it." "Listen, I don't know who you are, but we know where you live, Marcus. We know about your sister in Portland, your ex-wife in Denver, your elderly parents in Florida. We know about your mortgage, your student loans, your chronic insomnia, and your prescription for Ambien. We know everything about you, and we're asking you nicely to forget about last night." The line went dead. I sat in my darkened office, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. The specificity of the threats was terrifying. They weren't bluffing. Someone had compiled a complete dossier on my life, and they were willing to use it to keep me quiet. But quiet about what? If 3i Atlas was just a comet, why go to such elaborate lengths to cover up my observations? The very existence of this conspiracy suggested that What I'd seen was real, and more significant than I'd imagined. I walked through my apartment, checking locks and drawing curtains. Every shadow seemed to harbour potential surveillance, every car passing on the street a possible threat. I'd stumbled onto something that powerful people desperately wanted hidden, and now I was in their crosshairs. The smart thing would be to listen to the warning, delete whatever remaining files I could find, and pretend the whole thing never happened. I could go back to my quiet life of routine observations and meaningless reports. I could be safe. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That metallic glint making impossible course corrections as it sailed through the void. If this was evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, didn't the world have a right to know? I made a decision that would haunt me for months to come. Instead of backing down, I was going to dig deeper. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and careful routine. I went to work, processed data on mundane asteroids, and avoided anything remotely connected to 3i Atlas. My supervisors seemed satisfied that I'd gotten the message, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever I moved through the office. At home, I'd become obsessive about security. I disconnected my personal computer from the internet and started using an old laptop with a VPN connection from various coffee shops around the city. If someone was monitoring my activities, I was going to make it as difficult as possible. It was on Thursday night, exactly a week after my initial observations, that everything changed again. I was reviewing innocuous comet data on the disconnected computer when a notification chimed from the old laptop. New email. That was odd. I hadn't given the address to anyone, and it was supposed to be completely anonymous. The sender field was blank. The subject line read simply, "You're not alone." My cursor hovered over the message for several long minutes. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, another layer of the conspiracy designed to draw me deeper into danger. But curiosity won out, and I clicked. The email contained no text, just a single encrypted attachment. The file name was project_Atlas_1987_declassified.pdf. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. 1987. That was decades before the discovery of our first confirmed interstellar visitor. Yet here was a file suggesting that something called Project Atlas had been operational for over 30 years. The decryption key was embedded in the file metadata, almost as if someone wanted to make sure I could access it easily. I ran the file through every security scanner I could find, but it came back clean. Finally, I opened it. What I saw made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped the laptop. The document was a partial intelligence briefing stamped with classifications I'd never seen before. The header read, "Interstellar Object Reconnaissance Program, Project Atlas, Eyes Only." The first page contained an executive summary that made my blood run cold. Analysis of Object Designation 1/2017 U1 Oumuamua confirms artificial origin and reconnaissance capabilities consistent with previous visitations dating to 1987. Object demonstrated controlled trajectory adjustments, non-gravitational acceleration, and structural properties incompatible with natural formation. Recommend continuation of monitoring protocols and information containment procedures. I scrolled through page after page of technical analysis, trajectory data, and spectroscopic readings that painted a picture I could barely comprehend. Oumuamua, the first officially recognised interstellar visitor, hadn't been a natural object at all. According to this document, it was some kind of reconnaissance probe, and it wasn't the first. The file included a timeline that made my stomach churn. 1987, first confirmed artificial interstellar object, designation classified. 1996, second visitor, trajectory adjusted to avoid detection. 2003, third visitor demonstrated active camouflage capabilities. 2017, Oumuamua arrival, too large to conceal from public observation. 2019, 2I/Borisov, partial artificial characteristics detected, and at the bottom of the timeline, a chilling projection. Pattern analysis suggests visitation cycle of 6 to 7 years. with each object following optimized surveillance trajectories through inner solar system. Recommend heightened monitoring for next projected arrival, 2025 to 2026 time frame. 3i Atlas had arrived right on schedule. I spent hours poring over the technical data trying to understand the implications. These weren't random cosmic visitors. They were part of a systematic surveillance operation spanning decades. Someone, or something, had been conducting regular reconnaissance of Earth, and our governments had known about it all along. The document included references to information containment protocols and civilian observation management, which explained what had happened to my data. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a well-established system for suppressing any evidence that leaked into public channels. But why give me this information? Who had access to such highly classified material, and why were they willing to risk everything to leak it to a low-level data analyst? I printed the entire document on the coffee shop's printer, then deleted all traces from the laptop. This was too important to trust to digital storage alone. As I walked home through the darkened streets, clutching the papers under my jacket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning brought a fresh horror. When I arrived at work, my supervisor was waiting at my desk with a grim expression. "Marcus, we need to talk. Conference room 3 now." Inside the sterile meeting room, he laid out a series of photographs across the table. They showed me entering the coffee shop, using the laptop, printing documents, and walking home with a manila envelope under my arm. "We've been very patient with you," he said quietly, "but this ends now. Whatever game you think you're playing, it stops today." I stared at the surveillance photos, realizing just how completely I was outmatched. They'd been watching every move, documenting every attempt to investigate further. The leaked document wasn't help. It was bait, designed to draw me out and prove that I couldn't be trusted to stay quiet. "I don't know what you want me to say," I managed. "I want you to say that you understand. You're a good analyst, Marcus, but you're in way over your head. Take a vacation, 2 weeks, paid leave. Think about whether this job is really the right fit for you." The message was clear. Back off or lose everything. But as I cleaned out my desk under the watchful eyes of security, I couldn't help but smile grimly. They thought they'd caught everything, but they were wrong. Hidden in my apartment was a complete copy of the Project Atlas file, and more importantly, I now knew I wasn't the only one who'd seen through the deception. Someone else was out there, someone with access to the deepest secrets of the conspiracy, and they were trying to help me expose the truth. 2 weeks of forced vacation gave me time to think, but sleep remained elusive. Every night I found myself staring out my bedroom window at the stars, wondering how many of those points of light had been visited by the Watchers. The Project Atlas document had opened a door to a reality I couldn't close again. I'd hidden the printed files in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, but I'd memorized every crucial detail. The pattern was what haunted me most. Regular intervals, a systematic coverage, and a level of coordination that suggested long-term planning spanning multiple decades. During the day, I visited libraries and used their public computers to dig through archived astronomical data. I was looking for gaps, objects that had been observed briefly and then forgotten, trajectory anomalies that had been dismissed as instrument error, anything that might fit the pattern described in the classified document. What I found was more disturbing than I'd imagined. In 1987, the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics had published a brief note about an unusual object designated 1987 QX. The initial observations showed it on an interstellar trajectory, but follow-up attempts failed to relocate it. The official explanation was insufficient data for continued tracking. But buried in the technical appendix, I found a reference to anomalous spectral characteristics suggesting metallic composition and non-gravitational acceleration inconsistent with comet outgassing. 1987, QX had been the first visitor, exactly as described in the leaked document. I found similar patterns throughout the historical record, objects that appeared briefly in official catalogues before being reclassified or forgotten entirely, always at the predicted intervals, always showing subtle signs of artificial origin, always disappearing from public view after initial detection. The 1996 visitor had been detected by 3 different observatories, but within months, all references to it had been removed from published papers. I found fragments in old conference abstracts and preliminary reports, but the object itself had been erased from the official record. By 2003, the concealment efforts had become more sophisticated. That year's visitor never appeared in any public catalogues at all, but I found oblique references to it in budget documents, requesting additional funding for deep space monitoring equipment, and personnel evaluations praising staff for exceptional discretion in sensitive operations. The pattern was undeniable. For over 30 years, someone had been systematically monitoring and covering up evidence of artificial objects entering our solar system. The only question was, who was doing the covering up, and what were they hiding? My research was interrupted by a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Marcus Webb?" The voice was elderly, gravelly, with a slight tremor. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's been watching your library research with great interest. My name is Dr. Harold Peterson. I think we should meet." The name was familiar. I'd seen it referenced in some of the older papers I'd been reviewing. Harold Peterson had been a respected astronomer in the 1980s, specialising in small body observations. His publications had stopped abruptly in 1988. "What do you want?" "I want to show you something that will change how you see everything, but not over the phone. Are you familiar with the old Griffith Observatory parking lot? Meet me there at midnight." Every instinct told me it was a trap, but I'd come too far to turn back now. That night I drove through the winding roads of Griffith Park, checking my rearview mirror constantly for signs of surveillance. The observatory was closed, its parking lot nearly empty except for a few late-night stargazers. Dr. Peterson was exactly what I'd expected. A thin, white-haired man in his 70s, leaning heavily on a walking cane and clutching a worn leather satchel. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "You're not the first to notice the pattern, Mr. Webb. I've been tracking it for over 3 decades. The difference is, I learned to keep my mouth shut." We sat on a bench overlooking the Los Angeles basin, the city lights washing out all but the brightest stars. He opened the satchel and withdrew a collection of photographs, charts, and handwritten notes. 1987 was when it all started for me, he said. I was working at Palomar then, part of a team doing systematic surveys of near-Earth objects. We detected 1987 QX on a Tuesday night in October. By Friday our department had been restructured, and I'd been reassigned to different projects. He showed me photographs of the object, grainy black and white images that nonetheless clearly showed an elongated structure with sharp edges and reflective surfaces. Nothing like any natural comet I'd ever seen. They offered me a choice: sign a non-disclosure agreement and continue my career studying harmless asteroids, or maintain my academic integrity and find myself blacklisted from every observatory in the world. I chose my career and I've regretted it every day since. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm 74 years old, mister. Webb, I have pancreatic cancer, and I'm going to be dead within 6 months. They can't threaten my career anymore, and I'm tired of carrying this secret. He handed me a manila folder filled with documentation I'd never seen before. Internal memos about visitor protocols, budget allocations for special projects, and correspondence between observatories about maintaining operational security. There are more of us out there, he said. Astronomers who've seen things they can't talk about, technicians who've been reassigned after asking too many questions, graduate students whose thesis projects have been mysteriously cancelled. We're scattered, isolated and afraid, but we're not alone. The final document in the folder was a list of names and contact information. 24 astronomers, all with similar stories of suppressed observations and forced silence. At the top of the list was a note in Doctor. Peterson's handwriting. Project Atlas isn't just about covering up alien visitation. It's about preparing for something much bigger. The pattern is accelerating. What do you mean, accelerating? The intervals between visits are getting shorter. The objects are getting larger, and according to my calculations, the next one isn't coming to observe anymore. He pointed up at the stars with a trembling finger. It's coming to stay. We sat in silence for several long minutes, the weight of his words settling over me like a shroud. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since I'd first seen the anomalous data. What do we do about it? Dr. Peterson smiled grimly. We prepare for the possibility that our governments have been lying to us for 37 years, and we get ready to find out what they've really been hiding. As I drove home that night, the list of names burning like a coal in my jacket pocket, I realised that my journey was far from over. I thought I was investigating a simple cover-up, but I was actually uncovering something much more complex and terrifying. The watchers in space weren't just visitors passing through our solar system. They were scouts, preparing the way for something bigger. And soon, we were going to find out what that something was. Dr. Peterson's death made the obituary section of the Los Angeles Times 3 days after our meeting. Noted astronomer Harold Peterson, 74, died, peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. No mention of his decades of research or his role in early deep space observations. Just another forgotten scientist disappearing from the record. But his list lived on. I'd spent the past week carefully reaching out to the contacts he'd provided, using coded language and anonymous email accounts. The responses had been both encouraging and terrifying. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the University of Arizona. I've been waiting 30 years for someone to ask the right questions. James Mitchell, formerly of JPL. They reassigned me to Mars imaging after I got too curious about irregular trajectories. I've kept my own records. Professor Liu Wei from Beijing Observatory. The phenomenon is global. Chinese space program has similar protocols. Each conversation revealed another piece of the puzzle. The conspiracy wasn't limited to American institutions. It was an international effort involving every major spacefaring nation. The implications were staggering. My unofficial network was coming together just in time for the Southwest Astronomical Conference in Phoenix. It was perfect cover. Hundreds of professional and amateur astronomers gathering to discuss recent observations and share data. If I was careful, I could meet with several of my contacts without raising suspicion. I registered under my real name and booked a flight to Phoenix, trying to maintain the appearance of normal professional activity. But as I packed for the trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Cars seemed to linger too long outside my apartment. The same face appeared in multiple coffee shops. Paranoia, maybe, but the events of the past month had taught me to trust my instincts. The conference was held at a sprawling resort complex in Scottsdale, with sessions scattered across multiple buildings and hundreds of attendees milling about between presentations. Perfect for discreet meetings, but also perfect for surveillance. I'd arranged to meet Dr. Rodriguez during the lunch break at a quiet cafe in the resort's north wing. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with prematurely grey hair and intense dark eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of her surroundings. "You're taking a big risk reaching out to all of us," she said quietly as we found a corner table. "They're very good at monitoring communications." I know, but Dr. Peterson thought it was time to break the silence. Harold was a good man. He carried this burden longer than any of us should have to. She slid a thin tablet across the table. "I've compiled everything I could recover from my observations in 1996. The trajectory data alone should be enough to prove artificial control." I downloaded the files to an encrypted drive, noting the precision of her documentation. This wasn't the work of a conspiracy theorist. This was rigorous scientific analysis that had been systematically suppressed. "There's something else," she said. "I've been in contact with colleagues in other countries. The pattern isn't random. These objects are conducting systematic reconnaissance of our entire solar system, mapping resources, defensive capabilities, population centres. For what purpose? That's what we need to find out. But I don't think we have much time left." Our meeting was interrupted by the arrival of James Mitchell, a nervous-looking man in his 60s who kept glancing over his shoulder as he approached our table. "We need to move," he said urgently. "There's a man with a camera taking pictures of everyone at this table." Black suit, earpiece, sitting by the fountain. I turned casually and spotted him immediately. Too well dressed for a conference, too alert for a tourist. Our eyes met for a split second before he looked away, but I'd seen enough to know we were blown. "How did they find us so fast?" Dr. Rodriguez whispered. "Doesn't matter," Mitchell replied. What matters is getting out of here before they decide we're too dangerous to monitor passively. We separated and left through different exits, but the damage was done. My cover was blown, and now they knew I was actively building a network of suppressed witnesses. As I walked back to my hotel room, I could feel eyes on me from multiple directions. That evening I attended a presentation on deep space observation techniques, trying to maintain the appearance of normal conference activity. But my mind was racing, processing everything I'd learned and trying to anticipate their next move. The answer came sooner than expected. When I returned to my room at 11 p.m, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, reaching for the light switch, and froze. My room had been systematically searched. Every piece of luggage had been opened, every pocket turned inside out. My laptop was missing, along with the encrypted drives containing the leaked documents. But they'd left something behind. A single photograph on the bed. It showed me sitting at the cafe with Doctor Rodriguez and Mitchell, all three of us clearly identifiable. Written across the bottom in red ink, "Last warning." I grabbed my passport and the few items they'd left behind and got out of there immediately. The hotel lobby was filled with conference attendees, but I could spot at least 3 people who didn't belong, too alert, too focused on me specifically. I made it to my rental car and drove straight to the airport, abandoning my scheduled return flight for the first available departure to anywhere. As the plane lifted off, I watched Phoenix's lights disappear below and tried to process how completely my life had changed. I was no longer an investigator uncovering a conspiracy. I was a fugitive being actively pursued by forces with unlimited resources and no apparent limits on their willingness to use them. But I'd also gained something invaluable, proof that I wasn't alone and confirmation that the pattern was real. Whatever was coming, there were others who'd been preparing for it, and together we might stand a chance of exposing the truth. The question now was whether we could do it before they silenced us all permanently. I spent 3 weeks moving between cheap motels and internet cafes, using cash and fake names, trying to stay one step ahead of whoever was hunting me. The paranoia was exhausting, but the leaked documents I'd memorized kept me focused on the bigger picture. If the pattern was real, if something was coming, then the world deserved to know. My breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Professor Liu Wei had put me in touch with a contact in the hacktivist community, someone known only as Ghost Signal, who specialized in hijacking broadcast streams for political messages. If I could provide credible evidence, they could get it in front of millions of people before anyone could stop them. The meeting was set up through an elaborate chain of encrypted communications. I found myself in a 24-hour diner in Albuquerque, sitting across from a 20-something woman with purple hair and enough facial piercings to set off a metal detector. She introduced herself only as Maya, and seemed to take the whole thing as a personal challenge. "So you're telling me the government's been covering up alien visitors for 30 years, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Not alien visitors, reconnaissance probes. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Either way, it's the biggest story in human history and they've been lying about it." She pulled out a modified tablet and began typing rapidly. "I can get you into any broadcast stream you want. Major networks, streaming services, social media feeds. The question is, what exactly do you want to tell people?" I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The message needed to be clear, credible, and impossible to dismiss as a hoax. I outlined my plan, a 10-minute presentation laying out the evidence, supported by the data I'd compiled from multiple sources. "Here's the problem," Maya said. "As soon as you start broadcasting, they're going to try to shut you down. I can keep the stream live for maybe 15 minutes before they find all my back doors. You get one shot at this. That's all I need." We spent the next hour setting up the technical details. Maya would hijack a popular astronomy livestream during peak viewing hours, giving me access to an audience already interested in space-related content. The broadcast would go out simultaneously across multiple platforms, making it harder to suppress completely. "One more thing," she said as we prepared to leave. "Once this goes live, there's no going back. They'll know exactly who you are and where you are. You sure you're ready for that?" I thought about Dr. Peterson, dying alone with his secrets, about Dr. Rodriguez and the others spending decades in forced silence, about 3i Atlas sailing through space on its impossible trajectory while the world remained oblivious to the truth. I'm ready. The broadcast was scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern Time on a Thursday night, prime viewing for astronomy enthusiasts. I'd rented a small studio space under a fake name and set up basic recording equipment. Maya would handle the technical aspects remotely, leaving me to focus on delivering the most important message of my life. At exactly 9 o'clock, Maya's voice crackled through my earpiece. "You're live in 3, 2, 1. Good evening. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a data analyst for the Near-Earth Object Surveillance Network. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about our place in the universe." I started with 3i Atlas, describing my initial observations and the systematic erasure of evidence. Then I expanded to the broader pattern, using charts and graphs to illustrate the regular intervals and artificial characteristics of the interstellar visitors. "These objects aren't random cosmic debris," I continued, holding up copies of the leaked documents. "They're part of a systematic reconnaissance program that has been monitoring Earth for over 3 decades. Our governments know this, and they've been actively covering it up." The chat feed exploded with comments, skepticism mixed with fascination as viewers tried to process what they were hearing. Some demanded additional proof, others shared their own unexplained observations, and a few confirmed that similar anomalies had been reported in other countries. "The pattern is accelerating," I said, moving to my final slides. "The intervals between visits are getting shorter, and according to my analysis, the next object, designated 4/ATLAS, isn't coming to observe. It's coming to establish a permanent presence." I displayed the trajectory calculations that showed the next visitor would arrive within 18 months, on a path that would bring it into a stable orbit around Earth rather than passing through the solar system. Based on the data I've compiled from multiple sources, 4I/ATLAS will arrive in approximately 543 days. Unlike its predecessors, this object will not be leaving. It will take up position in our local space, and we need to be prepared for what that means. The chat feed was going crazy now, with thousands of viewers sharing the stream and demanding answers. Several amateur astronomers confirmed they could verify parts of my data with their own observations. The message was spreading faster than I dared hope. That's when Maya's voice crackled urgently in my earpiece. "We've got company." Black SUVs surrounding the building, and my feeds are being traced. "Wrap it up now." "If you're watching this, please share it with everyone you know," I said quickly. "The truth has been hidden for too long. In less than 2 years, we're going to find out what 37 years of reconnaissance has been preparing for. Don't let them keep you in the dark anymore." The feed went black just as I heard heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. I grabbed my notes and headed for the fire exit, but it was too late. 3 men in dark suits were already coming through the door, moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Mr. Webb, you need to come with us." I thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do. The message was out there, spreading across the internet faster than they could contain it. Even if they silenced me now, the truth was already in motion. "Did I get your attention?" I asked. The lead agent smiled coldly. "You have no idea what you've just done." As they led me out in handcuffs, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a storefront window. I looked exhausted, paranoid, probably more than a little crazy. But I also looked free. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the burden of the secret alone. The truth was finally out there, and now the world would have to decide what to do with it. I spent the next 72 hours in a windowless room that officially didn't exist, being questioned by people who officially weren't there. They didn't identify themselves, didn't read me my rights, and didn't seem particularly interested in following any legal procedures I was familiar with. The questions were always the same. Who had given me the classified documents? How many copies existed? Who else was involved in my conspiracy to disseminate false information? I stuck to the same answers. I'd acted alone, based on my own observations and publicly available data. They showed me printouts of the social media explosion that had followed my broadcast. Number sign Atlas pattern was trending worldwide, with millions of shares and thousands of amateur astronomers attempting to verify my claims. The initial wave of skepticism was giving way to grudging acceptance, as independent observers confirmed the trajectory anomalies I'd described. "You've caused quite a stir," said the lead interrogator, a woman in her 40s with steel-grey hair and eyes like winter. 12 countries have filed formal diplomatic protests. 3 observatories have been forced to release previously classified data. The president is demanding answers. "Good," I said. "Maybe now we can have an honest conversation about what's really happening." "You have no idea what you've done. Do you think we've been keeping this secret for fun? Do you think there isn't a reason for the careful management of this information?" For the first time I detected something other than cold professionalism in her voice. There was fear there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Then tell me the reason," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to decide something important. Finally she spoke. "The reason is panic, mister." "Webb. The reason is the complete collapse of social order when 6 billion people realise they're not alone in the universe and that their governments have been lying to them for decades. The reason is mass hysteria, economic collapse and the end of civilization as we know it. People have a right to know. People have a right to survive. And sometimes those two rights are incompatible." She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of news reports from the past few days. Stock markets crashing as investors fled anything connected to space technology. Religious leaders declaring the end times. Protest movements demanding government transparency. Military bases around the world placed on high alert. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Your little broadcast has started something that none of us can control anymore. I hope you're proud of yourself." They released me that evening without explanation, dropping me off at a bus station in a city I didn't recognise with nothing but my wallet and a warning to maintain a low profile. As I waited for a bus back to Los Angeles, I checked my phone for the first time in 3 days. The internet had exploded. My broadcast had been downloaded millions of times before the original streams were taken down. Amateur astronomers around the world were confirming the trajectory anomalies. Government officials were being pressed for statements, offering carefully worded non-denials that only fueled more speculation. But there was also a disturbing counter-narrative emerging. Professional debunkers were dissecting my presentation, pointing out inconsistencies and questioning my credentials. News outlets were running pieces about dangerous conspiracy theories and the psychology of false pattern recognition. My personal life was being scrutinised, with emphasis on my history of insomnia and anxiety medication. By the time I made it back to Los Angeles, the story was already shifting. The initial excitement was fading, replaced by sophisticated disinformation campaigns that made my claims seem increasingly implausible. Fake documents were circulating that contradicted my evidence. Expert witnesses were appearing on news programs to explain how natural phenomena could account for the observed anomalies. The cover-up was adapting, evolving to contain the damage I'd caused. I found my apartment exactly as I'd left it, but something felt different. The locks hadn't been changed. Nothing appeared to be missing, but there was a subtle wrongness that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't until I checked my computer that I understood. Every file related to my investigation was gone, replaced by different versions that told a completely different story. The trajectory data now showed normal comet behaviour. The leaked documents appeared to be obvious forgeries. My own research notes had been altered to make me look delusional. They weren't just discrediting my story. They were gaslighting me on a personal level, making me question my own memories and observations. But they'd made one mistake. Hidden in a safety deposit box across town were the original printed documents Doctor Peterson had given me, physical proof that couldn't be digitally altered. As long as those papers existed, I had evidence that the conspiracy was real. I spent my first night back trying to contact the other members of my informal network, but most of their numbers had been disconnected. Dr. Rodriguez's university claimed she'd taken an extended sabbatical. James Mitchell's former colleagues insisted he'd moved overseas without leaving a forwarding address. Only Maya responded to my encrypted messages, and her news wasn't encouraging. "They've been thorough," she typed. "Every copy of the broadcast has been scrubbed from major platforms. The mirrors I set up have been taken down. Even the cached versions are disappearing from search engines. What about the amateur confirmations? Being systematically debunked. They've got teams of experts explaining away every anomaly, providing alternative interpretations for every piece of evidence. It's like watching history being rewritten in real time. I stared at my screen, feeling the weight of defeat settling over me. I'd sacrificed everything to get the truth out, and they were erasing it as efficiently as they'd erased my original data files. "There's something else," Maya continued. "I've been monitoring the official astronomy networks. They're planning something big. A coordinated announcement about 3i Atlas that's going to put this whole thing to bed once and for all." The announcement came 2 days later, during a press conference at NASA headquarters. A panel of distinguished astronomers and agency officials presented their definitive analysis of 3i Atlas, complete with detailed explanations for every anomaly I'd observed. The trajectory corrections were caused by asymmetric outgassing from previously undetected volatile compounds. The lack of a visible coma was due to unusual mineral composition that sublimated in the infrared spectrum. The precise course changes were actually random fluctuations that appeared purposeful when viewed through the lens of conspiracy thinking. They even had a new name for the phenomenon: false pattern syndrome, a psychological condition where observers perceived intentional design in random data. I was cited as a textbook example, a well-meaning analyst whose mental health issues had led him to see aliens where none existed. The presentation was flawless, authoritative, and completely convincing. Within hours, the remaining support for my claims evaporated. Social media moved on to other conspiracies. The news cycle found new crises to exploit. 3i Atlas was officially just another comet, and I was officially just another delusional conspiracy theorist. But as I watched the press conference from my apartment, clutching Dr. Peterson's documents and remembering the fear in my interrogator's eyes, I knew they hadn't really won. They'd controlled the narrative, managed the public reaction, and preserved the status quo. But they couldn't change the truth. In less than 500 days, 4I/ATLAS would arrive, and all their careful lies would be exposed. The only question was whether anyone would be watching when it happened.